In the blood-soaked soil of ancient Terra, amid the thunderous campaigns of the Unification Wars, the Emperor forged his most perfect creations. While the Thunder Warriors blazed across battlefields with brutal efficiency but fleeting lifespans, and before the Primarchs were even a whisper in the gene laboratories, the Master of Mankind crafted guardians who would stand closest to his radiance. These were not mere soldiers, but extensions of his will, companions who would understand his vision more intimately than any other beings in the galaxy. They were the Legio Custodes, later known as the Adeptus Custodes, the 10,000. The creation of the Custodian Guard represented a fundamentally different approach to transhuman engineering than what would later be employed for the Astartes. Each Custodian was a uniquely crafted masterpiece, their transformation beginning in early childhood through methods so complex and individual that no standardized template existed. The Emperor personally oversaw the creation of each of his companions, particularly in the earliest days, applying techniques that blended genetic manipulation, psycho-conditioning, and esoteric sciences beyond the comprehension of even the brightest minds of the Mechanicum. Unlike the industrial efficiency that would later characterize the creation of Space Marines, the making of a Custodian was painstaking artisanship. The raw materials, children selected from Terra's nobility, warrior castes, and occasionally from conquered enemies whose genetic potential caught the Emperor's eye, underwent transformation at the cellular level. Their bodies were rebuilt molecule by molecule, their minds reshaped through hypno-indoctrination and direct psychic imprinting from the Emperor himself. The process took decades rather than years, producing warriors whose physical and mental capabilities vastly outstripped even the finest Astartes. This meticulous creation process established a unique psycho-spiritual bond between each Custodian and the Emperor. It wasn't mere loyalty that bound them, it was a fundamental reshaping of their being. Each Custodian became attuned to the Emperor's will in a manner that transcended ordinary consciousness. They could sense his intentions, understand his thoughts with a clarity impossible for ordinary humans or even Astartes. This connection wasn't telepathic in the conventional sense, but rather an intrinsic harmony of purpose and perception. A Custodian didn't need explicit orders to understand what the Emperor required. They simply knew, as naturally as breathing. The selection process for potential Custodians prioritized mental fortitude and genetic compatibility above all else. Children were tested not merely for physical potential, but for psychological resilience and cognitive adaptability. Many candidates died during the extensive modification procedures, their bodies unable to withstand the radical transformation. Those who survived emerged as something beyond human, golden demigods whose every cell had been perfected for their singular purpose: to stand beside the Master of Mankind and protect him from all threats. This transformation produced beings fundamentally different from the later Astartes in both form and function. While Space Marines were created as soldiers, weapons to be deployed in the Emperor's Great Crusade, Custodians were companions and guardians first. Their martial prowess, though legendary, was secondary to their role as the Emperor's confidants and protectors. This distinction manifested in their training, which emphasized individual combat excellence rather than unit cohesion, and in their psychological makeup, which prioritized independent thought over the brotherhood-focused mentality of the Astartes. Constantin Valdor, the first and greatest of the Custodians, exemplified this difference. Bearing the title Captain General, and honored as First of the 10,000, Valdor possessed a singular relationship with the Emperor that even Primarchs like Horus or Robute Guilliman could not claim. His name wasn't merely a designation, but a recognition of his individual identity and worth. Unlike Space Marines, who often took new names upon their induction into a legion, Custodians retained individualized identities, sometimes incorporating elements of their original names alongside honorifics earned through service. These names and titles carried profound significance within Custodian culture. Each name represented not just the individual, but their specific role in the Emperor's grand design. A Custodian might bear a name reflecting their area of expertise, their notable achievements, or aspects of their personality that the Emperor himself had recognized as valuable. The tradition of name-bearing emphasized that custodians were not interchangeable parts in a military machine, but unique entities with personal relationships to their creator. The martial differences between Custodes and Astartes were equally profound. While Astartes were trained to fight as cohesive units, emphasizing brotherhood and collective strength, Custodians were supreme individualists in battle. Each was expected to be a self-contained army, capable of facing any threat without necessarily relying on his brothers. Their equipment reflected this philosophy, custom crafted to the individual warrior's preferences and fighting style, often incorporating technologies too rare or complex to be mass-produced for the Astartes legions. The Custodian fighting doctrine emphasized versatility and adaptability. A space marine might specialize in a particular combat role within his squad, but a Custodian was expected to master all aspects of warfare. This comprehensive training produced warriors who could seamlessly transition between roles as circumstances demanded. In one moment, a Custodian might be engaging in diplomatic negotiations with Terra's techno-barbarian warlords. In the next, single-handedly eliminating an assassination team that had breached the Imperial Palace's outer defenses. During the Unification Wars, the Custodians served not only as the Emperor's bodyguards, but as his executors, diplomats, and messengers. They carried his will to the scattered tribes and nation-states of Terra, sometimes offering the hand of friendship, other times delivering swift and merciless judgment. Their golden armor and towering stature made them living symbols of the Emperor's power, inspiring awe and terror in equal measure among those who had yet to accept unification. The philosophical underpinnings of the Custodian mindset were equally distinct from those of the Astartes. Space Marines were created with a sense of purpose centered around conquest and compliance, their identities bound up in their legions and primarchs. Custodians, by contrast, existed solely to serve the Emperor's person and vision. They had no divided loyalties, no primarch to mediate their relationship with their creator. Each Custodian understood himself as an extension of the Emperor's will, a living instrument of his designs. This singular focus manifested in a detachment from ordinary human concerns that even Astartes found difficult to comprehend. Custodians did not seek glory, advancement, or recognition from anyone except the Emperor himself. They viewed the broader Imperium, even the Great Crusade, as secondary to their primary duty of protecting the master of mankind. This perspective sometimes led to tension between Custodians and other Imperial forces, particularly when the needs of the Crusade seemed to conflict with the Emperor's personal security. The bond between the Emperor and his Custodians was further strengthened through direct participation in rituals and ceremonies known only to them. In the shadowed halls beneath what would become the Imperial Palace, the Emperor shared knowledge with his companions that he withheld even from his Primarch sons. The Custodians learned of threats beyond the material realm, of the Emperor's true purposes, and of the dark necessities that underlay his actions. This shared understanding created a unity of purpose that transcended ordinary loyalty. Constantin Valdor's position as Captain General represented the pinnacle of this relationship. As first of the 10,000, Valdor stood as the Emperor's right hand in matters too sensitive or complex to entrust to others. His title wasn't merely administrative, but recognized his unparalleled closeness to the Emperor's designs. Historical records suggest that Valdor was present during the most pivotal moments of the Unification Wars, standing beside the Emperor as he negotiated the Treaty of Mars with the Mechanicum, witnessing the creation of the first Primarch gene seed, and participating in councils that would shape humanity's destiny for millennia to come. The distinctive golden armor of the Custodians, later formalized as the Auramite plate, served both practical and symbolic functions. Practically, it provided protection superior to even Astartes' Terminator armor, incorporating archaeotech systems and materials available only through the Emperor's personal resources. Symbolically, it proclaimed their status as the Emperor's chosen companions, their golden radiance mirroring his own luminous presence. Each suit was individually crafted to its wearer's specifications, often incorporating personal heraldry and honor markings that told the story of that Custodian's service. As the unification wars drew to a close and the Emperor's gaze turned to the stars, the role of the Custodian Guard evolved. While some would accompany him on the Great Crusade, the majority remained on Terra, protecting the Imperial Palace and overseeing the burgeoning imperial government in his absence. This division of duties reinforced their fundamental purpose, not as conquerors, but as guardians of the Emperor's person, works, and vision. The relationship between Custodians and the nascent Astartes legions was complex from the beginning. While both served the Emperor, their different origins and purposes created natural divisions. Custodians viewed the Astartes as useful but ultimately limited tools, mass-produced warriors lacking the deep connection to the Emperor that defined Custodian existence. Astartes, for their part, often found Custodians aloof and arrogant, too concerned with the Emperor's person, and not enough with the broader imperial project of reuniting humanity. This philosophical divide would prove prescient during the later Horus Heresy, when half the Astartes legions turned against their creator, while the Custodian Guard remained unanimously loyal. The difference lay in their fundamental nature. Astartes were created as soldiers with autonomy and brotherhood as core values, while Custodians were fashioned as extensions of the Emperor's will, incapable of turning against him without denying their very essence. The creation of a Custodian stands as perhaps the Emperor's most perfect work of genetic artistry, surpassing even the magnificent but mass-produced Astartes who would later form the backbone of his crusading armies. Where Space Marines undergo a standardized process of implantation and transformation, each Custodian represents a unique genetic masterpiece, crafted through techniques so advanced they border on the arcane. The fundamental difference begins with the raw material. While Astartes aspirants are typically recruited as adolescents, Custodian candidates are selected in early childhood, sometimes even as infants. This allows for more comprehensive genetic restructuring at the cellular level, before the body has fully developed its adult characteristics. The Emperor's gene craft doesn't merely add to the human template as with Astartes implantation, it rewrites it entirely. The process takes decades rather than the standard years required for Astartes transformation. During this time, the candidate's entire physiological structure is dismantled and rebuilt countless times. Their musculature is enhanced not just through additional fiber density, but through the creation of entirely new muscle types unknown in baseline humans. Their skeletal structure undergoes molecular reinforcement that makes their bones nearly unbreakable while maintaining flexibility that would be impossible with mere ceramic grafting. Perhaps most significantly, their neurological systems receive modifications so extensive that a Custodian's neural architecture bears little resemblance to that of an unaltered human. Additional nerve bundles, supplementary cortical regions, and specialized synaptic structures grant them processing speeds and sensory acuity that eclipses even that of the Astartes. A Custodian can process battlefield information and react to threats in microseconds, their enhanced minds calculating trajectories, evaluating threats, and formulating responses faster than even augmented human perception can follow. The blood chemistry of the Custodes represents another marvel of the Emperor's craft. Their circulatory systems contain specialized cell types that can instantly seal wounds, neutralize toxins, and resist warp-based corruption. These cells operate with a level of efficiency that makes even the multi-lung and oolitic kidney of an Astartes seem primitive by comparison. Custodians can filter out poisons that would kill Space Marines outright, and their enhanced healing allows them to recover from wounds that would be fatal to any other being. This physiological supremacy manifests most visibly in their combat capabilities. A standard Custodian stands taller than an Astartes, typically reaching heights of 9 feet or more when fully armored. Their strength exceeds that of Space Marines by a considerable margin. Historical battle records from the Great Crusade era document individual Custodians lifting wreckage weighing several tons or tearing through armored bulkheads with their bare hands. Their speed defies their massive size, with reaction times measured in fractions of heartbeats. The lifespan of a Custodian represents another triumph of the Emperor's gene craft. While Space Marines can live for centuries barring violent death, Custodians measure their service in millennia. The oldest among the 10,000 have stood guard for over 10,000 years since the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne, showing minimal signs of physical degradation. This near immortality doesn't stem from suspended animation or stasis technology, but from cellular regeneration mechanisms built into their modified genome. Unlike the Astartes, whose creation follows the template of the gene seed derived from their primarchs, each Custodian's transformation follows a unique genetic pathway. No two Custodians are crafted exactly alike. The Emperor designed each one individually, tailoring their capabilities to emphasize particular strengths or specialized functions. Some might possess enhanced visual acuity for sentinel duties, others extraordinary strength for close protection, while others might have neural adaptations optimized for strategic analysis. This individualized approach to their creation explains why no standardized Custodes gene seed exists. The Emperor never intended them to be mass-produced like the Astartes legions. Each Custodian represents thousands of hours of direct genetic manipulation, psycho-conditioning, and spiritual attunement that cannot be simplified into a standardized procedure. Even the Primarchs, for all their magnificence, were created following a set of genetic templates, albeit 18 vastly different ones. The Custodes represent a more artisanal approach to transhuman creation. This bespoke method of creation carries significant implications. It means that the Custodian Guard cannot rapidly replenish their numbers after taking losses. The creation of a single new Custodian requires resources, expertise, and time that might produce dozens or even hundreds of Space Marines. This limitation explains why, despite their individual superiority, the Custodes have always been limited to a comparatively small force, traditionally numbered at around 10,000 warriors, though the exact count has fluctuated throughout Imperial history. The psychological architecture of a Custodian receives as much attention as their physical form during their creation. While Astartes undergo hypno-indoctrination to instill loyalty to their Primarch and Legion, Custodians experience a more profound reshaping of their cognitive structures. Their minds are attuned directly to the Emperor's psychic signature, creating a connection that transcends ordinary loyalty. This attunement makes them effectively immune to corruption, as their very thought patterns are fundamentally aligned with the Emperor's will. This mental restructuring produces warriors whose loyalty isn't based on conditioning or obligation, but exists as an integral part of their being. A Custodian no more considers betraying the Emperor than a heart considers refusing to beat. This intrinsic loyalty explains why, throughout the long and bloody history of the Imperium, not a single Custodian has ever fallen to the corrupting influence of chaos or turned against the Golden Throne. During the catastrophic events of the Horus Heresy, when even the Emperor's beloved Primarchs proved vulnerable to corruption, the Custodian Guard remained steadfast. As half the Astartes legions turned traitor, following their Primarchs into rebellion, the 10,000 never wavered. This incorruptibility wasn't merely a matter of superior discipline or stronger indoctrination. It stemmed from their fundamental nature. The Emperor had crafted them to be extensions of his will, and that connection proved unbreakable even when tested by the full might of the Chaos Gods. The battle records from the Siege of Terra provide stark evidence of this incorruptibility. As demonic entities manifested within the Imperial Palace, many defenders fell to madness or corruption. Even some loyalist Astartes required psychic shielding to maintain their sanity in the face of such warp-spawned horrors. The Custodians, however, faced these entities with minds unblemished by doubt or temptation. They recognized the fundamental unreality of these warped creatures and denied them purchase on their thoughts. This resistance to corruption extends beyond mere psychological fortitude. The Emperor incorporated metaphysical protections into the Custodian genome, creating beings whose very cells reject warp influence. These protections don't render them immune to physical harm from warp entities. A demon's claws can still tear Custodian flesh, but they prevent the spiritual corruption that poses the greater danger to most Imperial forces. A Custodian might die fighting a demon, but they will never serve one. The physiological capabilities of the Custodes find their perfect expression in combat. Their weapons handling demonstrates precision that makes even veteran Astartes seem clumsy by comparison. A Custodian can bisect a target with a Guardian's spear at 100 paces, thread a bolt round through an eye socket at extreme range, or deflect incoming fire with the blade of their weapon. These aren't merely skills honed through practice, but capabilities built into their enhanced neuromuscular systems. Their combat endurance similarly exceeds that of other Imperial forces. During the War in the Webway, individual Custodians fought continuously for days without rest, holding back tides of demons in the confined tunnels beneath the Imperial Palace. Their enhanced physiology allows them to function at peak combat efficiency despite wounds, exhaustion, or environmental hazards that would incapacitate even Space Marines. Records from this conflict describe Custodians continuing to fight despite injuries that had reduced them to operating with a single functioning arm or leg. The sensory capabilities of the Custodes represent another aspect of their superiority. Their enhanced visual spectrum allows them to perceive details invisible to normal humans, including certain wavelengths that can detect warp-tainted individuals before they manifest obvious corruption. Their hearing can distinguish individual voices in a crowd of thousands or detect the subtle click of a weapon being armed several rooms away. Some Custodians possess limited precognitive abilities, sensing danger moments before it materializes, not through warp-based foresight, but through subconscious processing of environmental cues too subtle for others to notice. These enhanced senses serve their protective function perfectly. A Custodian standing guard can monitor hundreds of potential threats simultaneously, constantly calculating risk factors and response scenarios. This awareness extends beyond the physical realm. Many Custodians develop a sensitivity to warp disturbances that allows them to detect immaterial threats before they fully manifest. This capability proved crucial during the Heresy, when assassination attempts against the Emperor often incorporated both physical and psychic elements. The individualized nature of Custodian creation produces warriors with distinctive capabilities and specialties. The Shield Captain Ammon Toramation, for instance, possessed exceptional tactical analysis abilities that allowed him to coordinate complex defensive operations during the early stages of the Heresy. Tribune Jassak Niboran demonstrated unprecedented resistance to psychic attacks, making him invaluable in confrontations with enemy psychers. Each Custodian's unique genetic profile grants them particular strengths that complement those of their brothers. This diversity of capabilities allows the Custodian Guard to function effectively despite their limited numbers. Where Astartes might deploy specialized units for different battlefield roles, individual Custodians often possess the versatility to adapt to multiple combat scenarios. A single Custodian might serve as heavy support, close combat specialist, and battlefield commander as circumstances demand, shifting between roles seamlessly thanks to their comprehensive enhancements. The combat doctrines of the Custodes reflect this individual supremacy. While Astartes typically fight in coordinated squads that maximize the effectiveness of their specialized roles, Custodians operate with greater autonomy. Each warrior functions as a self-contained combat unit, capable of assessing threats and responding appropriately without constant direction. When Custodians do fight in formation, they do so as collections of supreme individuals rather than as components of a rigid unit structure. This approach to warfare stems directly from their original purpose. Created as the Emperor's personal guardians rather than conquest troops, Custodians were designed to operate in environments where chain of command might be disrupted or standard combat doctrines might prove insufficient. Their ability to function independently ensures that even if isolated from their brothers, each Custodian remains a formidable defensive asset. The weapons and wargear of the Adeptus Custodes represent some of the finest examples of Imperial craftsmanship ever created, technologies so advanced that many of their manufacturing techniques remain unknown even to the highest echelons of the Adeptus Mechanicus. These are not mere tools of war, but masterworks crafted individually for warriors who stand as the Emperor's chosen companions. The Guardian Spear stands as the iconic weapon of the Custodian Guard, a perfect marriage of ranged and melee capability that reflects their role as supremely adaptable warriors. Each spear is crafted specifically for its wielder, balanced precisely to their fighting style and physical dimensions. The haft is typically composed of adamantium alloys reinforced with molecular bonding studs, making it nearly unbreakable, even under the tremendous force a custodian can exert. The blade itself is a marvel of material science, monomolecular in its edge, and capable of slicing through ceramite power armor as easily as flesh. The integrated bolter component of the Guardian Spear fires specialized ammunition unique to custodian weaponry. These bolt rounds are larger caliber than standard Astartes bolter shells, containing enhanced explosive cores and armor-piercing tips manufactured using techniques dating back to the Dark Age of technology. The weapon's targeting systems link directly to the wielder's armor, providing ballistic calculations and trajectory analysis that allow for pinpoint accuracy even during complex maneuvers. The creation of a Guardian Spear involves rituals dating back to the Unification Wars. Master artificers of the Adeptus Custodes maintain forges deep within the Imperial Palace, where these weapons are crafted through processes combining advanced technology with artisanal techniques. Each component is inscribed with microscopic hexagrammic wards that provide protection against warp entities, while power field generators are calibrated to frequencies that maximize disruption of both physical matter and immaterial substances. The Sentinel blade represents an alternative to the Guardian Spear, favored by custodians who specialize in close-quarters combat or who serve in the shield companies that guard the innermost sanctums of the Imperial Palace. These power swords feature broader blades than typical Astartes power weapons, designed to both slice with lethal precision and provide a defensive surface against incoming attacks. The power field generators within these blades operate at energy outputs that would burn out standard power weapons, maintained by micro-reactors that can sustain peak performance for decades without maintenance. Most Sentinel blades incorporate a secondary ranged weapon in their hilt, typically a bolter similar to that found in Guardian Spears, though some ancient examples contain more exotic weapons such as Volkite chargers or disruptor beams. This integration allows a custodian to maintain ranged capability without sacrificing close combat effectiveness, a crucial advantage when protecting the Emperor's person against diverse threats. The Castellan axe offers a third primary weapon option, favored by custodians who emphasize raw striking power over the balanced approach of the Guardian Spear. These massive power axes can cleave through the heaviest armor with single strikes, their adamantium alloy heads enhanced with disruption fields powerful enough to breach even the ceramite plating of a Contemptor dreadnought. The axe's haft houses stabilization gyros that help control the tremendous force of a full swing, allowing for precision despite the weapon's devastating power. Beyond these signature weapons, the Custodian Guard maintains arsenals of specialized equipment for particular combat roles. The Adrasite and Adrathic weapons represent perhaps the most advanced personal armaments in the Imperium's arsenal, utilizing principles of matter conversion that the Adeptus Mechanicus can no longer fully comprehend. Adrathic weaponry, in particular, operates by disrupting the bonds between atoms, causing targets to collapse into clouds of component particles. So dangerous and advanced is this technology that its use is restricted to the Custodes and a handful of other Imperial organizations operating directly under the authority of the High Lords of Terra. The Oromite armor worn by the Custodian Guard represents the pinnacle of personal protection technology in the Imperium. Each suit is handcrafted for its specific wearer, the golden plates formed from an alloy whose composition remains one of the Emperor's closely guarded secrets. Analysis conducted by Mechanicus adepts suggests the material contains elements not found naturally in the galaxy, possibly synthesized through technologies lost since the Dark Age of technology. Unlike Astartes' power armor, which follows standardized patterns with minor variations between chapters, Custodian armor is crafted individually. The process begins with a complete anatomical assessment of the warrior, including bone density scans, muscle tension analysis, and neural response mapping. Artificers then design each plate to work in perfect harmony with the wearer's physiology, creating a second skin that enhances rather than restricts natural movement. The inner layer of Custodian armor consists of a mesh of psycho-conductive fibers that relay neural impulses between the warrior's body and the armor's systems. This interface allows for response times measured in nanoseconds, eliminating the lag present in even the finest Astartes armor. The middle layer comprises molecular bonded ceramic plates, each inscribed with microscopic circuitry that monitors structural integrity and redistributes impact forces across the entire suit. The outer layer, the distinctive golden plates that have earned the Custodes their nickname, the Golden Legion, serves both protective and symbolic functions. The auramite alloy provides resistance to energy weapons, physical impacts, and even certain types of psychic attacks. The gold coloration isn't merely decorative. It results from specific elements in the alloy that absorb and dissipate energy across a wide spectrum. This property makes Custodian armor particularly effective against Law's weapons and plasma-based attacks. The power systems of Custodian armor operate at efficiency levels unmatched by other Imperial technology. Micro-reactors housed in the suit's backplate provide power for centuries without refueling, while backup systems ensure functionality even after catastrophic damage. The armor's machine spirit, if such advanced systems can be described in such terms, possesses computational capabilities approaching those of a small cogitator network, constantly analyzing environmental data and optimizing performance parameters. The helmet of Custodian armor incorporates sensory enhancement systems that expand the wearer's already superhuman perceptual abilities. Multispectral visual augmenters allow custodians to see across a range of light frequencies, identifying threats that would be invisible to normal sight. Audio processors can filter specific sounds from background noise, focusing on potential danger signals while dampening distractions. Some helmets also contain limited psychic wards that help alert the wearer to immaterial threats. The symbolic importance of Custodian armor extends beyond its golden appearance. Each suit bears inscriptions recording the deeds of its wearer, campaigns they've participated in, and honors bestowed by the Emperor or Captain General. These markings aren't standardized like Astartes battle honors, but follow ancient traditions dating back to the Unification Wars. Some custodians incorporate elements from Terra's pre-imperial cultures into their heraldry, particularly those whose bloodlines trace back to specific regions of old Earth. For specialized combat roles, the Custodes employ several variants of their standard wargear. Perhaps most impressive is the Alaris Terminator armor, worn by custodians tasked with undertaking targeted decapitation strikes against enemy leadership. This armor surpasses even standard Custodian plate in its protective capabilities, incorporating layered alloy composites and reinforced joint mechanisms that can withstand direct hits from anti-tank weapons. The Alaris suit's most remarkable feature is its relative lightness compared to Astartes Terminator armor. Where Space Marine Terminators move with deliberate, ponderous steps, Custodians in Alaris plate retain much of their natural agility. This mobility stems from advanced weight distribution systems and neural-linked servo motors that anticipate the wearer's movements. The armor also incorporates teleportation Homer technology of unprecedented precision, allowing for tactical insertion directly into enemy command structures. The Dawn-Eagle jetbike represents another specialized equipment type, used by the Virtus Praetors, who serve as the Custodes' rapid reaction force. These anti-gravitic vehicles descend from patterns used during the Unification Wars, their technology so advanced that even the Adeptus Mechanicus cannot fully replicate their construction. Each bike bonds psychically with its rider, responding to thought impulses faster than physical controls could allow. The Hurricane bolters mounted on Dawn-Eagle jetbikes fire specialized ammunition developed specifically for high-speed engagement. These rounds maintain accuracy despite the extreme velocities at which the bikes operate, their guidance systems compensating for both the bike's movement and that of the target. Some Virtus Praetors replace these weapons with salvo launchers that fire melta missiles capable of vaporizing armored vehicles with direct hits. The Custodes also maintain access to archaeotech weapons too rare or dangerous for general Imperial use. The Telemann Dreadnought chassis, for instance, represents technology several generations more advanced than the contemptor pattern used by Astartes. These massive war engines house grievously wounded custodians in amniotic tanks surrounded by weapons systems that can level small fortresses. The Galatus and Achilles variants serve more specialized combat roles, the former emphasizing close combat with its massive shield and blade, the latter designed for precision strikes against priority targets. Among the rarest equipment entrusted to the Custodes are the Venatari weapon systems. The Kinetic Destroyer, a weapon whose principles of operation remain classified at the highest levels, can disintegrate targets through accelerated particle bombardment that bypasses conventional armor. The Venatari also employ specialized Cestus weapons that combine power field technology with disruptor generators, allowing them to breach even the most heavily armored targets in melee combat. The Custodes' arsenal includes defensive equipment of equal sophistication. The storm shield carried by shield captains generates overlapping energy fields that can absorb tremendous punishment, including direct hits from vehicle-mounted weapons. These devices incorporate technology similar to void shields used on Imperial starships, miniaturized through techniques known only to the most senior artificers of the Custodes. The Vexilla standards carried into battle serve both practical and ceremonial functions. Beyond their role as rallying points, these devices contain sophisticated communications arrays and psychic dampeners that can disrupt enemy coordination. The Vexilla Magnifica, in particular, projects a field that makes it difficult for enemies to accurately target custodians, causing ranged attacks to go astray through a combination of visual distortion and subtle psychic suggestion. For operations requiring extended deployment away from Terra, Custodians utilize specialized equipment designed for self-sufficiency. Their armor can recycle bodily waste into nutrients and hydration, allowing warriors to remain sealed in their plate for months if necessary. Integrated Medicae systems can stabilize even catastrophic injuries, administering combat stims and regenerative compounds automatically in response to detected trauma. The Webway project represented the Emperor's most ambitious undertaking since the creation of the Primarchs themselves, a secret endeavor that would free humanity from its reliance on warp travel and shield the species from the predations of the Empyrean. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, the Master of Mankind labored to create a permanent entrance into the ancient Eldari Webway network, a system of dimensional corridors that would allow instantaneous travel without exposure to the warp. The Custodian Guard formed the primary defensive force for this most critical of Imperial secrets, with thousands of the Golden Warriors standing sentinel in the labyrinthine passages that the Emperor had conquered and claimed for humanity. When Magnus the Red shattered these carefully constructed wards in his desperate attempt to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal, he unknowingly unleashed catastrophe. The Webway project collapsed, and through the rupture poured the denizens of the warp, an endless tide of demons intent on reaching Terra itself. Thus began what Imperial scholars would later call the War in the Webway, a desperate, years-long campaign fought entirely in secret while the greater heresy consumed the galaxy above. The burden of this hidden war fell primarily upon the Custodian Guard. Day after day, week after week, they held the line against impossible odds, forming a golden bulwark between demonic hordes and the throne world. The narrow confines of the Webway passages negated the demons' numerical advantage to some degree, allowing the Custodians to hold choke points and create killing grounds where their superior individual combat abilities could be maximized. Records recovered from this period speak of Custodians fighting for weeks without rest, their enhanced physiology allowing them to continue long after even Space Marines would have collapsed from exhaustion. Shield Captain Carthene led a squad that held the junction of 7 paths for 19 days without reinforcement or resupply, the warriors fighting in shifts to maintain an unbroken defense against wave after wave of Tzeentchian horrors. When relief finally arrived, only 3 of the original 12 Custodians remained alive, their armor blackened with ichor and their weapons dulled from constant use. The psychological toll of this endless combat was perhaps even more significant than the physical. Custodians were created to be the Emperor's companions, diplomats, and personal guards, not to fight a grinding war of attrition. Their training emphasized perfect, decisive action in short-duration engagements, not the soul-wearing marathon of constant battle against foes that defied logical understanding. Yet they adapted, drawing on reserves of mental fortitude that even they had not known they possessed. Constantin Valdor himself led many of the counteroffensives during this period, personally directing tactical withdrawals and strategic redeployments as the situation demanded. His presence inspired his warriors to feats of valor that stretched the boundaries of what even transhuman bodies could endure. Under his command, the Custodians didn't merely hold defensive positions, but launched calculated strikes against demon concentrations, disrupting enemy advances before they could build momentum. The casualties suffered during this hidden war were staggering. Of the approximately 10,000 Custodians active at the beginning of the heresy, nearly half would perish in the Webway conflict alone. Each death represented an irreplaceable loss, a unique transhuman warrior whose creation had required decades of the Emperor's personal attention. Unlike the Astartes legions, which could replenish their ranks through relatively efficient gene seed implantation, the Custodian Guard had no quick method to replace fallen warriors. Tribune Jassaric fell leading a desperate charge to seal a breach near the impossible fortress, his body torn apart by bloodletters, but his actions allowing 300 civilians and tech adepts to escape the slaughter. Shield Captain Heraclast Vadrian, one of the oldest serving Custodians who had stood beside the Emperor during the Unification Wars, sacrificed himself to collapse a major webway junction, buying time for Imperial forces to establish a new defensive line. Warden Hexrin, master swordsman and personal bodyguard to Valdor himself, held a narrow corridor alone for 6 hours after his companions fell, his sentinel blade claiming over 80 demons before a greater demon of Slaanesh finally overwhelmed him. These losses were not merely statistical, but deeply personal to the surviving Custodians. Unlike Astartes, who were conditioned to accept casualties as an inevitable part of warfare, Custodians maintained stronger individual connections to their brothers. Each death represented the loss of a unique perspective, a singular creation of the Emperor that could never be duplicated. This understanding lent a grim determination to their defense. Each position held, each demon banished, represented a vindication of their fallen comrades' sacrifice. As the war in the Webway ground on, the Emperor himself was forced to take a more direct hand. Seated upon the Golden Throne, he directed his psychic might through the damaged Webway portal, holding back the tide of demons through sheer force of will. This necessitated his almost constant presence on the throne, removing him from direct participation in the wider heresy and placing even greater responsibility on the Custodian Guard. The Silent Sisterhood, the Emperor's cadre of female psychic nulls, proved invaluable allies during this conflict. Their soul-blank auras disrupted the very substance of demons, creating zones where the creature's power was diminished. Custodians and Sisters developed specialized combat formations that maximized this advantage, with Null Maidens positioned to create corridors of weakened warp energy through which Custodian strike teams could advance. When the Emperor finally ordered a full withdrawal from the Webway, recognizing that the project could not be salvaged, the Custodians implemented a fighting retreat of masterful precision. Rearguard actions allowed for the evacuation of all Imperial personnel and equipment, with the last Custodian units backing through the portal moments before the Emperor sealed it permanently. The cost had been enormous, but the primary objective, preventing demons from reaching Terra through the Webway, had been achieved. While the war in the Webway consumed much of the Custodian Guard's strength, others of their number were engaged throughout the wider heresy. Constantin Valdor himself operated as the Emperor's personal emissary during this period, undertaking missions of critical importance that required his unique authority as Captain General. Historical records confirm his presence at several pivotal moments of the conflict, though many of his activities remain classified even 10 millennia later. Valdor was present on Prospero during the Space Wolves sanction of Magnus, the Red's Legion, serving as the Emperor's official witness to the implementation of imperial justice. His role was not merely ceremonial. He provided strategic guidance to Leman Russ and ensured that the operation remained focused on its authorized objectives. When the violence escalated beyond the original parameters, Valdor attempted to moderate the wolves' fury, recognizing that the complete destruction of the 15th Legion had not been the Emperor's intent. Contrary to some apocryphal accounts, there is no confirmed record of a direct confrontation between Constantine Valdor and the Primarch Alfarius. Such stories likely originated from misinterpreted reports of Custodian engagements with Alpha Legion forces during the latter stages of the heresy. While Valdor certainly clashed with traitor forces on multiple occasions, documented evidence of a personal duel with any Primarch other than brief exchanges during larger battles does not exist in Imperial archives. Valdor's most significant contribution to the Loyalist cause came during the organization of Terra's defenses as Horus's fleet approached the throne world. Working in concert with Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, Valdor deployed his remaining custodians at critical junctures throughout the palace perimeter. Rather than concentrating his forces, he distributed them strategically, positioning small teams of custodians to reinforce Imperial army and Astartes' defensive positions at likely breakthrough points. This approach maximized the psychological impact of the custodians' presence, while ensuring that their unique combat capabilities could influence the widest possible area of the battlefield. A squad of 5 custodians could stiffen the resolve of an entire regiment of mortal soldiers, their golden armor and transhuman presence a tangible reminder of what they fought to protect. When breakthroughs occurred, these small custodian units served as rapid response forces, containing penetrations until larger formations could be redeployed. As Horus's forces made planetfall and the siege of Terra began in earnest, the Custodian Guard faced their greatest test. The outer defenses of the palace fell one by one despite the valiant resistance of the Loyalists, forcing a fighting withdrawal to the inner rings. Here, the Custodians came into their own, their intimate knowledge of the palace's labyrinthine structure allowing them to channel enemy advances into prepared killing grounds. The Eternity Gate, final barrier before the inner palace and the Emperor's sanctum, became the focus of some of the siege's most desperate fighting. A contingent of 300 custodians under shield, Captain Inabar Stentinox held this position against repeated assaults by traitor Astartes and demon engines. The narrow approach to the gate negated the attacker's numerical advantage, allowing the defending custodians to exact a terrible toll on each wave. Contemporary accounts describe the steps before the gate disappearing beneath a carpet of traitor bodies, with custodian blades reaping a constant harvest of the misguided and the damned. When the traitorous Primarch Angron himself led an assault on the Eternity Gate, it seemed that even the custodian's valor might prove insufficient. The demon Primarch's unnatural strength and speed, coupled with his utter disregard for casualties among his own forces, threatened to overwhelm the defenders through sheer momentum. It was here that Shield Captain Stentinox performed perhaps the most famous last stand in Custodian history, personally engaging Angron to buy time for reinforcements to arrive. Stentinox had no realistic hope of defeating a demon Primarch in single combat, but his sacrifice was calculated to serve a greater purpose. By focusing Angron's rage on himself, he disrupted the coordination of the traitor assault and prevented the World Eaters from exploiting breaches elsewhere in the defensive line. For nearly 7 minutes, an eternity in such combat, Stentinox evaded Angron's attacks, his guardian spear inflicting wounds that would have felled any lesser opponent. When he finally fell, his body torn apart by the demon Primarch's unnatural strength, Imperial reinforcements had arrived to stabilize the position. Throughout the palace, similar scenes played out as custodians made their stands against impossible odds. At the Delphic Gates, Tribune Cadai led 30 custodians against a titan of the Legio Mortis, the warriors using their superior mobility to avoid the war machine's main weapons, while targeting its joints and sensory apparatus with precisely placed melta charges. Though all 30 would perish in the engagement, their actions immobilized the Titan and prevented it from bringing its firepower to bear on a critical command bunker. In the Hall of Glories, a solitary custodian named Hido Venator held a narrow stairwell against a company of Death Guard for over 4 hours, his body absorbing toxins and contagions that would have killed an Astartes in seconds. By the time he succumbed, reinforcements had evacuated the civilian administrators sheltering on the levels above, his sacrifice saving hundreds who would otherwise have fallen to Mortarian's sons. When the Emperor finally made his fateful decision to confront Horus directly, he selected a small honor guard of custodians to accompany him to the War Master's battle barge, the Vengeful Spirit. This final mission represented both the highest honor and the most terrible duty that could befall a custodian, to stand beside their creator as he faced his fallen son. Of the companions who accompanied the Emperor to that final confrontation, none would return alive. The exact details of what transpired aboard the Vengeful Spirit remain shrouded in mystery and contradiction. What is known with certainty is that the Emperor's Custodian Guard fought with characteristic valor against the elite of the traitor forces. They advanced through corridors thick with enemies, each golden warrior accounting for dozens of traitor Astartes before falling. Their purpose was not victory. No force so small could hope to defeat the concentration of traitor might aboard Horus's flagship, but to clear a path for the Emperor to reach his corrupted son. In this, they succeeded, though at the ultimate cost. The final custodian fell within sight of the War Master's sanctum, his sacrifice allowing the Emperor to confront Horus directly. What followed belongs to a different chapter of Imperial history, but the custodian's role in making that confrontation possible cannot be overstated. Their deaths aboard the Vengeful Spirit represented the culmination of their purpose, to serve the Emperor unto death, to stand between him and all threats, to sacrifice everything in fulfillment of their duty. When the grievously wounded Emperor was returned to Terra and interred upon the Golden Throne, the surviving custodians faced a profound existential crisis. They had failed in their primary purpose, the protection of the Emperor's person. Despite their superhuman abilities, despite their total dedication, despite thousands of heroic last stands, the Master of Mankind now existed in a state between life and death, his physical form shattered beyond recovery. This failure transformed the Custodian Guard on a fundamental level. Where once they had been companions and counselors as well as protectors, they now became pure guardians, obsessed with atonement through eternal vigilance. The custodians withdrew almost entirely from imperial politics and governance, focusing their entire existence on the protection of the Emperor's physical form and the Imperial Palace that housed it. Following the Emperor's interment upon the Golden Throne, the Adeptus Custodes entered a period of profound transformation. The warriors who had once stood as companions to the Master of Mankind now became silent sentinels, their golden armor seldom seen beyond the walls of the inner palace. This self-imposed isolation was not merely a tactical decision, but a philosophical one, born from the collective trauma of having failed in their primary duty. Shield Captain Dareth Cleomenes, one of the first to assume the watch after the heresy, established many of the protocols that would govern custodian operations for millennia to come. His writings, preserved in the Liber Custodium, outlined a doctrine of constant readiness and minimal external engagement. "We stand now as the final bulwark," he wrote, "not as warriors who seek battle, but as guardians who must never fail again. Our vigilance must be absolute, our presence undiminished by distractions beyond our walls." This doctrine manifested in a complete restructuring of custodian deployment patterns. Where once the 10,000 had been distributed across multiple imperial endeavors, accompanying the Emperor on campaigns, serving as emissaries to distant worlds, or undertaking special operations, they now concentrated almost exclusively within the Imperial Palace. The outer palace remained under the protection of the Imperial Fists and various elite regiments of the Imperial Army, but the inner palace became the exclusive domain of the Custodian Guard. The organizational structure of the post-heresy Custodes reflected this narrowed focus. The shield companies, basic tactical formations dating back to the Unification Wars, were reorganized to optimize defensive operations rather than expeditionary warfare. Each company maintained constant combat readiness, with warriors rotating through duty cycles that ensured peak performance without compromising the overall security posture. Unlike Astartes chapters, which typically operate with clearly defined command hierarchies, custodian shield companies maintained a more fluid organizational structure, with leadership determined by experience and tactical requirements rather than rigid rank. The Heteran Guard, those custodians specifically tasked with the direct protection of the Emperor's physical form, became the most prestigious assignment within the Custodian hierarchy. Selection for this duty involved rigorous additional testing beyond even the standard Custodian trials, with candidates facing simulated assassination attempts and psychic attacks designed to test their responses under extreme pressure. Those chosen for the Heteran Guard would stand in the Sanctum Imperialis itself, their vigilance focused on the Golden Throne and the machinery that sustained the Emperor's existence. Outside the Heteran, specialized divisions emerged to address particular aspects of palace security. The Theranat focused on heavy assault operations, training to counter large-scale attacks that might breach the outer defenses. The Ephoroi developed expertise in identifying and neutralizing infiltration attempts, particularly those employing advanced technology or warp-based deception. The Moritoi, those custodians too grievously wounded to serve in their original capacity, but whose minds remained sharp, directed surveillance networks and coordinated intelligence gathering throughout the palace complex. Perhaps the most significant development in post-heresy Custodian culture was the formalization of the Blood Games, a training regimen that had existed in simpler form since before the Great Crusade, but now became central to their operational doctrine. These exercises involved custodians temporarily leaving the palace to approach it as would-be infiltrators, testing defenses, and identifying vulnerabilities that actual enemies might exploit. The complexity and realism of these simulations increased over the millennia, evolving from straightforward penetration attempts into elaborate scenarios involving multiple operatives, civilian accomplices, and long-term cover identities. Shield Captain Hastrius Calaxus, who refined the Blood Games protocols during the 32nd millennium, established the tradition of vulnerability bounties, rewarding custodians who discovered previously unknown weaknesses in palace security. His innovations included the introduction of psychological warfare elements into the simulations, forcing defenders to contend not only with physical infiltration, but with misinformation, compromised personnel, and conflicting intelligence. Custodians who successfully completed particularly challenging blood games often received ceremonial recognition, their achievements recorded in the scrolls of eternity alongside battle honors from the Great Crusade era. The Blood Games served multiple purposes beyond the obvious security benefits. They provided essential field experience for warriors who rarely ventured beyond the palace walls, maintaining skills that might otherwise atrophy through disuse. They fostered healthy competition among the custodian ranks, preventing complacency from taking root. Perhaps most importantly, they offered psychological release for beings created for active service who now found themselves confined to a primarily defensive role. This confinement, however self-imposed, exacted a toll on the custodian psyche. Warriors created to be the Emperor's companions in his great work now stood silent guard over his barely living remains, their purpose reduced to preservation rather than progress. This stark diminishment led to what some custodian philosophers termed the unspoken shame, a collective sense of having outlived their true purpose, of existing as magnificent anachronisms in an imperium that had moved beyond the emperor's original vision. Tribune Diocletian Coros, in his controversial treatise, The Hollow Guard, articulated this sentiment most directly. We stand perfect and unchanging while the imperium we were created to help build crumbles into superstition and fear. Our blades remain sharp, our bodies remain strong, but our purpose has narrowed to a single point of light in an expanding darkness. We guard the emperor's body while his dream lies undefended. This philosophical malaise manifested in various ways throughout the millennia. Some custodians embraced a stoic fatalism, viewing their reduced circumstances as a form of penance for their failure during the heresy. Others developed an almost theological approach to their duties, elevating the protection of the emperor's physical form to a sacred trust that transcended all other considerations. A minority advocated for more active involvement in imperial affairs, arguing that true service to the emperor meant protecting his vision as well as his person. Despite their isolation, the Custodes maintained limited external connections through specialized operatives. The eyes of the emperor, former custodians whose physical capabilities had diminished below the exacting standards of active service, but whose minds remained sharp, served as an informal intelligence network throughout Terra and occasionally beyond. These veterans, having surrendered their armor and official status, moved through Imperial society unrecognized, observing potential threats and reporting back to their still active brothers. The eyes provided crucial early warnings of numerous threats to Terra over the millennia. During the 34th millennium, Eye operative Calidus Vibidius uncovered a genestealer cult that had infiltrated multiple levels of Terran governance, allowing for its elimination before it could trigger a broader uprising. In the 36th millennium, former Shield Captain Natarian identified corruption within the Adeptus Arbites precinct overseeing palace approaches, preventing what could have developed into a serious security breach. These quiet victories, unheralded by Imperial historians, exemplified the continued value of Custodian vigilance even in their reduced state. Beyond these covert operations, the Custodes occasionally deployed small forces beyond Terra in response to specific, critical threats. These missions were exceedingly rare, authorized only when the potential risk to the Emperor or Terra itself was deemed immediate and severe. Such deployments typically involved minimal forces, often a single shield captain accompanied by a small retinue, and focused on surgical interventions rather than extended campaigns. One such intervention occurred during the 33rd millennium, when Shield Captain Heraclean Marius led a strike team to the Forge world Morvain to eliminate a tech heresy that threatened to spread to Mars itself. The operation involved only 7 custodians, but resulted in the destruction of an entire Dark Mechanicum cell that had infiltrated the planet's ruling tech priest conclave. The custodians struck without warning or declaration, their golden armor appearing suddenly in the chambers of the corrupted Forge lords before disappearing just as quickly once the threat had been neutralized. In the aftermath of the Age of Apostasy, a custodian contingent under Tribune Cadmius conducted a thorough purge of the ecclesiarchal palace, rooting out remaining supporters of the mad High Lord Vandar who had escaped the initial purges. This rare direct intervention in imperial governance was justified by the proximity of the ecclesiarchal complex to the Imperial Palace itself, and the potential for remnants of Vandar's power base to threaten the Emperor's security. The custodians moved methodically through the labyrinthine structure, their actions characterized by surgical precision rather than the zealous fury that had marked the Sisters of Battle's earlier assault on the same location. During the Eighth Black Crusade, when Abaddon's forces threatened to penetrate the Cadian Gate and approach Terra directly, Shield Captain Turathan led a small force to reinforce a critical naval bastion in the Gothic sector. Their presence was unknown to most Imperial forces involved in the conflict. Their mission focused specifically on recovering archaeotech defenses that could be redeployed to strengthen Terra's orbital security. The Custodians achieved their objective amid the chaos of the broader conflict, neither seeking recognition nor coordinating with other Imperial forces beyond what was absolutely necessary for their mission. These limited external actions, while significant, represented exceptions to the Custodes' general policy of non-intervention in matters beyond the palace walls. For the vast majority of the 10 millennia following the heresy, the Custodian Guard remained focused inward, their golden armor a rare sight even for most inhabitants of Terra itself. This isolation fostered a unique culture within their ranks, one increasingly detached from the Imperium they nominally served. The philosophical outlook of the Custodes evolved significantly during this period of isolation. Where once they had been statesmen and diplomats as well as warriors, they gradually adopted a more detached perspective on imperial affairs. This detachment wasn't born from indifference, but from a growing recognition of the gulf between the Emperor's original vision and the reality of the Imperium that had developed in his absence. Many custodians came to view themselves not as servants of the Imperium, but as guardians of what remained of the Emperor's dream, a distinction that sometimes placed them at odds with other imperial organizations. This philosophical shift manifested most clearly in their relationship with the Adeptus Astartes. Where once the Custodes had viewed Space Marines primarily as less refined cousins serving a different but complementary purpose, the post-heresy Custodians regarded them with a complex mixture of respect and suspicion. The betrayal of half the legions had left an indelible mark on Custodian institutional memory, creating a wariness that never entirely faded, even when dealing with the most loyal chapters. Shield Captain Rothrian de Graves, in his Reflections on Transhuman Loyalty, articulated this perspective. The Astartes are weapons with minds of their own, created to conquer but bound by brotherhood to purposes that may shift with time. We were created to understand and protect, our loyalty etched into our very essence rather than built upon the foundations of shared oaths and battle bonds. Their way is not inherently flawed, but it contains within it the seeds of potential divergence that our nature precludes. This wariness extended to other imperial institutions as well. The Custodes maintained careful observation of the High Lords of Terra, recognizing the potential for corruption or misguided policy at the highest levels of imperial governance. While they rarely intervened directly in political matters, their potential to do so served as an unspoken check on the High Lord's power, particularly regarding decisions that might affect palace security or the Emperor's physical well-being. The relationship between the Custodes and the Inquisition proved particularly complex. Both organizations operated with extraordinary autonomy and authority derived directly from the Emperor, creating natural tensions over jurisdictional boundaries. The Custodes acknowledged the necessity of the Inquisition's work, while maintaining firm limits on inquisitorial access to the inner palace and the Emperor's person. This careful balance occasionally broke down, most notably during the reign of High Lord Goj Vander, when Custodian refusal to intervene against his excesses was misinterpreted as tacit support. Throughout these millennia of vigilance, the most profound change within Custodian culture was perhaps their evolving perception of the Emperor himself. Having stood guard over his decaying physical form for thousands of years, witnessing the constant psychic strain evident even in his near-death state, many Custodians developed a relationship with their creator that transcended simple loyalty. There emerged among them a deep, unspoken sense of shared burden, a recognition that just as they could never rest from their vigil, so too was the Emperor's labor unending. This perspective fostered a growing melancholy within their ranks, a sense that they had failed not just in allowing harm to come to the Emperor's body, but in the larger project of realizing his vision for humanity. Tribune Incarnus Vespillo captured this sentiment in his private journals. We guard his mortal remains while the dream he once shared with us slips further from memory with each passing century. The Imperium worships him as a god while forgetting everything he sought to build. We remember, and in remembering, we measure the full depth of our failure. This sense of failure became a central aspect of Custodian identity, driving them to ever more rigorous standards of vigilance and combat readiness. The Adeptus Custodes maintained training regimens that would have broken even Space Marines, pushing the limits of their transhuman bodies not merely to maintain effectiveness, but as a form of perpetual penance. Shield captains would regularly review historical records of the heresy, identifying moments where different actions might have altered the outcome, using these insights to refine defensive protocols and response strategies. As the millennia passed, the Custodes developed increasingly sophisticated methods for fulfilling their protective duties. Their surveillance systems evolved to incorporate technologies recovered from Dark Age archives, creating a security network that extended far beyond the physical boundaries of the palace. Specialized divisions focused on particular threat vectors, warp incursions, technological infiltration, assassination attempts, developing countermeasures that often remained unknown even to other Imperial defense forces. The Shadowkeepers, a specialized subdivision of the Custodian Guard, assumed responsibility for containing and monitoring the most dangerous artifacts and entities imprisoned beneath the palace. These vaults, existing in heavily fortified sublevels that predated even the Unification Wars, housed threats that could not be destroyed but must never be allowed to escape. The Custodians assigned to this duty faced horrors that would have broken lesser minds, standing guard over imprisoned demonic entities, reality-warping Xenos technologies, and corrupted relics from humanity's distant past. The Adeptus Custodes maintain a command structure unlike any other Imperial organization, one that has evolved over 10 millennia while preserving its core principles. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of the Astartes or the Byzantine chains of command found in the Astra Militarum, the Custodian rank structure emphasizes individual expertise and tactical flexibility over formalized authority. At the apex of this structure stands the Captain General, Master of the 10,000, and the Emperor's personal representative in matters of imperial security. This position has been held by legendary figures throughout imperial history, from Constantine Valdor during the Great Crusade and Heresy to the current Captain General, Trajan Valorous. The Captain General possesses authority second only to the Emperor himself, with theoretical power to override even the High Lords of Terra in matters relating to the throne-world's security. Trajan Valorous exemplifies the qualities expected of this exalted rank. Elevated to Captain General in the late 41st millennium after centuries of distinguished service, Valorous combines tactical brilliance with diplomatic subtlety. His personal combat record includes victories against Chaos Space Marine warbands, Drukhari raiding parties, and even a greater demon of Tzeentch during the defense of the Elysian Gate. Unlike many of his predecessors who rarely ventured beyond the palace walls, Valorous has taken a more active role in imperial affairs, personally leading Custodian forces during the Terran Crusade and the defense of Terra against the forces of chaos. The Captain General's authority extends beyond mere military command. As the nominal head of the Adeptus Custodes, he serves as their voice in the rare instances when the Custodes must interact with the broader Imperium. Valorous holds a permanent seat among the High Lords of Terra, though historical records indicate this position was frequently left vacant during the millennia of the Custodes' self-imposed isolation. When occupied, this seat grants the Captain General significant influence over imperial policy, particularly regarding matters of security and the defense of sacred Terra. Below the Captain General serve the tribunes, senior custodians who oversee broader strategic aspects of the Custodes' operations. Typically numbering between 3 and 5 depending on the era, each tribune takes responsibility for a specific aspect of the Custodes' duties. The Tribune Prefectus oversees palace security operations, while the Tribune Capitis manages the Custodes' limited but crucial diplomatic functions. The Tribune Marinus traditionally coordinates with the Imperial Navy regarding void defenses around Terra, and the Tribune Conservus oversees the maintenance of the Custodes' ancient arsenals and relics. Unlike Space Marine chapter masters, who function as supreme commanders of their forces, tribunes operate more as advisors and coordinators than direct superiors. A tribune does not issue orders to shield captains, but rather provides strategic guidance and ensures coordination between different custodian detachments. This distinction reflects the Custodes' emphasis on individual initiative and their unique approach to command structure. Shield captains form the operational leadership of the Custodes, each commanding a shield company comprising approximately 100 warriors, though this number has varied throughout imperial history. Selection for this rank comes not through formal promotion, but through a combination of peer recognition, combat record, and demonstrated strategic acumen. A shield captain earns his position through the accumulated respect of his brothers rather than appointment from above. The responsibilities of a shield captain extend beyond battlefield command. Each serves as both military leader and philosophical exemplar, expected to embody the highest ideals of the Custodian Guard. Many develop specialized expertise that defines their approach to command. Shield Captain Heraclast Vadrian was renowned for his mastery of void warfare, while Shield Captain Tibalus specialized in counter-psyker operations. This specialization allows for a distribution of expertise across the Custodian command structure, with shield captains consulting one another on matters relating to their respective fields of mastery. The rank of shield captain encompasses several specialized positions within the Custodian hierarchy. A shield captain commanding one of the Theranat Dreadhost formations bears the title Terminator Praetor, while those leading jet bike squadrons hold the designation Virtus Praetor. These distinctions reflect not merely differences in equipment, but specialized tactical training and battlefield role. A shield captain might transition between such roles throughout his centuries of service, accumulating diverse expertise that enhances his overall effectiveness. Beneath the shield captains serve the Vexillus Praetors, standard bearers whose role transcends the merely ceremonial. Each carries one of the ancient standards of the Custodian Guard, devices that incorporate both symbolic significance and practical battlefield utility. The Vexilla Imperius enhances the already formidable combat abilities of nearby custodians, while the Vexilla Defensor projects fields that can deflect incoming fire. The Vexilla Magnifica generates psycho-acoustic disruption that makes it difficult for enemies to target custodian forces effectively. The selection of Vexillus Praetors involves rigorous trials focused not merely on combat prowess, but on psychological resilience and symbolic understanding. A Vexillus must comprehend the deeper meanings behind the heraldry he bears, connecting present actions to the 10,000 years of tradition that preceded them. This position represents one of the few formalized ranks within the otherwise fluid custodian structure, with clear responsibilities and ceremonial duties that remain consistent across different shield companies. The vast majority of the Adeptus Custodes serve as custodian guards, though this seemingly simple designation encompasses warriors of incredible skill and diverse specialization. Unlike Astartes, who are typically assigned to specific tactical roles within their squad structure, custodians develop individual combat specialties based on personal aptitude and preference. A shield company might include close combat specialists, marksmen, tactical analysts, and siege warfare experts, all operating under the flexible direction of their shield captain. This emphasis on individual specialization rather than standardized tactical roles reflects the original purpose of the Custodian Guard. Created as the Emperor's companions rather than mass battlefield troops, each custodian was designed to function as a self-contained combat unit, capable of adapting to diverse threats without requiring rigid command structures. This approach contrasts sharply with the more regimented organization of Astartes chapters, where tactical specialties are often formalized into distinct squad types with standardized equipment loadouts. The Custodes organize their forces into shield companies, formations that serve as their primary tactical units. Unlike Astartes companies, which typically adhere to the organizational patterns laid down in the Codex Astartes, shield companies vary considerably in size, composition, and focus. Some might specialize in specific operational types, while others maintain broader capabilities suitable for diverse deployment scenarios. This flexibility allows the Custodian Guard to adapt their limited numbers to the wide range of threats they might face. Several shield companies have gained particular renown throughout Imperial history. The Dread Host, comprising multiple shield companies, specializes in overwhelming shock assaults against the most formidable enemies. Clad in Alaris Terminator armor and armed with weapons designed to eliminate priority targets, the Dread Host represents the Custodes' most direct application of military force. They deploy only against threats of exceptional significance, typically those that directly endanger Terra or the Emperor himself. The deployment of the Dread Host against the demon-corrupted Hollow Cult in the 34th millennium exemplifies their operational approach. When this heretical organization infiltrated multiple levels of Terran governance and threatened to destabilize the planet's defense infrastructure, Shield Captain Rothrian de Graves led 3 shield companies of the Dread Host in a simultaneous strike against 37 separate cult strongholds. The operation lasted less than 6 hours, but eliminated the entire cult leadership and secured evidence that led to the identification and purging of all remaining cult cells. The Solar Watch maintains vigilance over the Sol system itself, extending the Custodes' protective mandate beyond Terra to encompass humanity's birthplace. Mounted primarily on Dawn Eagle jetbikes that allow for rapid response across vast distances, the Solar Watch patrols the space lanes and settlements throughout Sol. Their golden armor, often adorned with solar iconography, has appeared without warning on worlds from Mercury to the moons of Neptune when threats to Imperial security have emerged. The Solar Watch operates with considerable autonomy, its shield captains authorized to make independent judgments regarding potential threats within their assigned territories. During the Nova Terra interregnum, when separatist forces attempted to establish a foothold on Venus, Shield Captain Dareth Cleomenes detected and eliminated the infiltration force before they could establish their intended beachhead. The operation remained unknown to even the Terran High Lords, with the Solar Watch resolving the threat before it required broader Imperial attention. The Shadowkeepers bear perhaps the most solemn duty among the Custodian shield companies. Tasked with guarding the dark cells beneath the Imperial Palace, they stand vigil over imprisoned horrors that cannot be destroyed, but must never be allowed to escape. These ancient vaults contain entities and artifacts dating back to the Age of Strife and earlier, bound demons, reality-warping Xenos technology, and corrupted relics whose very existence threatens the stability of the Imperium. The warriors of the Shadowkeepers adapt their equipment and tactics to the specific threats they contain. Those guarding cells containing demonic entities incorporate hexagrammic wards into their armor and weapons, while those overseeing vaults of dangerous archaeotech receive specialized training in recognizing and countering such technologies. The psychological burden of this duty is immense, requiring constant vigilance against threats that continuously test their containment. In the late 41st millennium, the awakening of the Primarch Robute Guilliman and the subsequent Indomitus crusade prompted significant changes in Custodian organization. The emissaries Imperatus emerged as a new shield company formation, tasked with carrying the Emperor's authority to distant battlefronts. These warriors serve as both warriors and representatives, ensuring that the Primarch's actions remain aligned with what the Custodes perceive as the Emperor's intentions. The relationship between the Adeptus Custodes and other Imperial organizations has evolved considerably throughout the millennia. Their interaction with the High Lords of Terra exemplifies this complex dynamic. As guardians of the Emperor, the Custodes possess theoretical authority to override the High Lords in matters directly affecting the security of the throne world, yet they have historically exercised this power with extreme restraint. During the Age of Apostasy, when the Mad High Lord Goj Vandir seized control of the Imperium, the Custodes adopted a position of calculated neutrality. They neither supported Vandir's excesses nor actively opposed him, so long as his actions did not directly threaten the Emperor's physical form. This apparent inaction drew criticism from some quarters, but reflected the Custodes' focused interpretation of their duty. They were guardians of the Emperor's person, not arbiters of Imperial policy. This restrained approach changed somewhat following the Gathering Storm and the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum. Captain General Valorous has taken a more active role in Imperial governance than many of his predecessors, regularly attending meetings of the High Lords and providing direct input on matters of Imperial security. This shift reflects both the increased threats facing the Imperium and Valorous's personal interpretation of the Custodes' protective mandate. The relationship between the Custodes and the Inquisition has always been characterized by mutual respect tempered with wariness. Both organizations derive their authority directly from the Emperor, creating a natural tension regarding jurisdictional boundaries. The Custodes acknowledge the necessity of the Inquisition's work while maintaining strict limits on inquisitorial access to the Inner Palace and especially to the Emperor's person. This careful balance has occasionally been tested throughout Imperial history. During the Reign of Blood, Inquisitor Jaeger attempted to gain access to the Sanctum Imperialis, citing evidence of potential corruption within the Adeptus Custodes itself. Shield Captain Navardaran denied this request and subsequently conducted an independent investigation that revealed Jaeger himself had been compromised by Tzeentchian influence. The incident reinforced the Custodes' policy of maintaining operational independence from even the most powerful Imperial institutions. The Custodes maintain a particularly complex relationship with the Adeptus Astartes. The Heresy-era division, when half the legions turned traitor while the Custodian Guard remained universally loyal, created a lasting wariness that has never entirely faded. The Custodes respect the military effectiveness of the Space Marines, while harboring fundamental doubts about the stability of their creation. This perspective manifests in a professional but distant approach to inter-organizational cooperation. This distance diminished somewhat following Guilliman's return and the introduction of the Primaris Space Marines. The Custodes have shown greater willingness to fight alongside these enhanced Astartes, perhaps recognizing in their improved gene craft a partial address to the flaws they perceived in the original Space Marine design. Shield Captain Tibellus, who fought alongside Primaris forces during the Indomitus Crusade, noted in his campaign journals that these warriors displayed a stability of purpose reminiscent of our own unwavering focus. The Custodes' command structure during combat operations differs significantly from Astartes' practices. Where Space Marines employ clear chains of command with designated squad sergeants, company captains, and chapter masters, Custodian battlefield leadership emerges more organically. A shield captain provides general strategic direction rather than moment-to-moment tactical commands, with individual custodians adapting to battlefield conditions based on their own assessment and initiative. This approach reflects their creation as the Emperor's companions rather than conventional military forces. Each custodian possesses not merely the physical capabilities, but the tactical acumen and decision-making authority to operate independently when necessary. In combat, this manifests as a fluid, adaptive fighting style that can appear almost improvisational to outside observers, but actually reflects deeply internalized tactical principles shared across the Custodian Brotherhood. The absence of a rigid military hierarchy does not indicate a lack of coordination. Custodians train extensively in small unit tactics that maximize their individual capabilities while ensuring cohesive action. Their enhanced cognitive abilities allow them to process battlefield information and adapt to changing circumstances faster than even Astartes, reducing the need for explicit command and control mechanisms. A Custodian strike force might split, recombine, and adapt its approach multiple times during a single engagement, each warrior intuitively understanding his role in the evolving tactical situation. This organizational flexibility proved particularly valuable during the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium. When massive orc forces threatened Terra itself, Shield Captain Heracleon led a containment operation that required constant adaptation to the unpredictable orc assault patterns. Rather than maintaining fixed defensive positions, the Custodian forces continuously redeployed based on real-time threat assessment, each warrior making independent tactical decisions that nonetheless contributed to the overall strategic plan. This approach confused the orc attackers, who struggled to identify and target Custodian command elements that did not exist in conventional form. Within the innermost sanctum of the Imperial Palace, where the Emperor's withered physical form sits enthroned upon the Golden Throne, stands the most elite cadre of warriors in the entire Imperium. The Companions, 300 custodians selected from among the 10,000 for their peerless skill and unwavering focus, maintain a constant vigil over the Master of Mankind. Their golden armor, more ornate than that of their brothers, gleams in the ethereal light that emanates from the throne itself, each warrior standing as a living statue, motionless yet eternally vigilant. Selection for the Companions involves trials beyond even the rigorous standards expected of regular custodians. Candidates undergo psychological conditioning designed to enhance their already formidable concentration, enabling them to maintain combat readiness despite standing guard for shifts that would exhaust even transhuman physiology. The mental discipline required is as demanding as the physical prerequisites. A companion must be able to remain perfectly still for days while simultaneously maintaining hyper-awareness of his surroundings, ready to react to threats with microsecond precision. The companions rotate through their duties in carefully calculated shifts, with exactly 100 custodians standing guard within the Sanctum Imperialis at any given moment. This rotation ensures that while the Emperor is never left undefended, no individual custodian's abilities are degraded by extended exposure to the unique psychic environment surrounding the Golden Throne. The schedule of this rotation is among the most closely guarded secrets in the Imperium, known only to the Captain General and a handful of senior SHIELD captains, preventing potential infiltrators from identifying patterns that might be exploited. SHIELD Captain Heraclean Atropos, who served as senior companion during the 36th millennium, described the experience in his private journals. To stand in his presence is to feel the weight of 10,000 years of suffering. The air itself seems charged with purpose and pain in equal measure. We stand not merely as shields against physical threats, but as anchors in reality itself, our presence reinforcing the boundaries between realms that grow ever thinner around the throne. The equipment carried by the companions represents the absolute pinnacle of Imperial technology. Their guardian spears incorporate enhanced power fields calibrated to disrupt both physical matter and warp entities with equal efficiency. Their armor contains additional layers of psychic warding, protecting them from the reality warping effects that sometimes manifest in proximity to the Golden Throne. Even their helmets feature specialized filtration systems that guard against the subtle psychic influence that radiates from the Emperor's broken form. The Companions' defensive formations have evolved over millennia of service. They stand not in rigid patterns, but in configurations derived from complex algorithmic principles, positions calculated to provide optimal coverage against every conceivable attack vector. These formations change subtly but constantly, responding to minute variations in the psychic atmosphere of the throne room. To an observer, the companions might appear to be standing in ceremonial arrangements, but each position has been precisely determined to maximize defensive capability. The burden of serving among the companions extends beyond the physical and mental strain of their duties. These warriors bear witness to the Emperor's daily agony, standing mere meters from the withered husk of the being they were created to protect. This proximity creates a unique form of psychological pressure, a constant reminder of their ancestors' failure during the Horus Heresy and the consequences of that failure that continue to shape the Imperium 10 millennia later. Many companions develop a complex relationship with their duty, one that transcends simple concepts of honor or obligation. SHIELD Captain Tiballus Maxellus, who served 3 separate rotations among the companions during his long service, wrote of experiencing moments of perfect clarity while standing guard, instances where the Emperor's lingering consciousness seemed to brush against his own. Whether these experiences represent actual psychic communication or merely the psychological effects of extended proximity to the throne remains a matter of debate among the Custodian philosophical circles. While the companions maintain their eternal vigil within the Sanctum Imperialis, far below the Imperial Palace another cadre of custodians stands guard over threats perhaps even more insidious than those which might assail the Emperor's physical form. The Shadowkeepers, formerly designated as the Custodian Guard Blackened Shield Host, protect the Dark Cells, ancient vaults containing entities and artifacts too dangerous to destroy, but too threatening to allow freedom. The origins of the Dark Cells predate even the Unification Wars, with some chambers sealed by the Emperor's own hand during humanity's earliest encounters with the horrors of the warp. These labyrinthine vaults extend deep beneath the palace foundations, occupying spaces where reality itself grows thin. Each cell incorporates multiple layers of physical barriers, energy fields, and psychic wards, creating containment systems that have held some prisoners for over 15,000 years. SHIELD Captain Borsa Thirsk, current commander of the Shadowkeepers, oversees a force permanently assigned to this most solemn duty. The Shadowkeepers modify their traditional golden armor with additional wards and sigils designed to protect against the specific threats they contain. Many incorporate blackened plates or dark accents into their armor as a symbolic recognition of their duty, standing apart from their golden brothers as guardians of the Imperium's darkest secrets. The threats contained within the Dark Cells defy easy categorization. Ancient records speak of bound demonic entities from humanity's earliest encounters with the warp, some dating back to the Age of Strife or earlier. Certain cells contain xeno specimens of species long extinct, preserved as the last examples of civilizations that once threatened mankind. Others house technological horrors, weapons and devices from the dark age of technology, whose functions violate fundamental laws of physics or whose machine spirits developed malevolent sentience. Perhaps most disturbing are the human occupants, individuals whose exposure to warp energies or forbidden technologies transformed them into something beyond mere mutation or corruption. These prisoners, some of whom have been contained since before the founding of the Imperium, exist in states that defy conventional understanding of life and death. The Shadowkeepers maintain their vigilance over these entities, not merely to prevent escape, but to ensure that knowledge of their very existence remains contained. Unlike the Companions, whose duty is primarily passive until a threat manifests, the Shadowkeepers engage in constant active containment. The barriers surrounding the dark cells require regular maintenance and occasional reinforcement, particularly when their occupants sense disturbances in the warp that might provide opportunities for escape. During periods of significant warp activity, such as the birth of the Great Rift, the Shadowkeepers enter a state of heightened alert, with additional forces deployed to reinforce containment protocols. The psychological burden placed upon the Shadowkeepers is unique even among the Custodian Guard. These warriors stand constant vigil against entities that actively seek to corrupt or destroy them, beings whose mere presence can erode sanity, and whose voices whisper promises and threats through layers of containment. Rotation through Shadowkeeper duty typically lasts no more than a century, after which a custodian is reassigned to other responsibilities to prevent the subtle damage that extended exposure might cause even to their resistant minds. Throughout Imperial history, there have been instances where containment has failed, necessitating direct intervention by the Shadowkeepers beyond their traditional underground domain. In the 34th millennium, an entity known in classified records only as the Prisoner of Cell 7 briefly escaped its confinement during a period of unusual warp turbulence. The resulting containment operation involved 30 Shadowkeepers led by Shield Captain Navardaran, who pursued the entity through the underhive of Terra's European sector before finally recapturing it at great cost. Of the 30 custodians who began the hunt, only 11 returned, the others lost to means that remain redacted even in internal custodian records. A more widespread breach occurred in the aftermath of the beheading in the 36th millennium, when multiple containment systems temporarily failed following the assassination of the High Lords of Terra. The Shadowkeepers mobilized in full force, deploying throughout the palace and into the surrounding hive structures to recapture escaped entities. This rare mass deployment revealed their existence to several other Imperial organizations, creating a security concern that necessitated memory modification protocols implemented by allied Sisters of Silence. The most significant containment failure in recent history followed the creation of the Cicatrix Maledictum. The psychic shockwave that accompanied the birth of the Great Rift resonated through the dark cells, weakening containment fields and allowing several particularly dangerous entities to escape. Shield Captain Thirsk made the unprecedented decision to dispatch Shadowkeeper forces beyond Terra itself, sending small kill teams to track entities that had fled through warp rifts to distant star systems. These operations marked the first time in thousands of years that significant numbers of Shadowkeepers had ventured beyond the Sol system. Their sudden appearance on battlefields across the Imperium, golden warriors bearing blackened shields and specialized containment devices, created confusion among Imperial forces unaware of their existence or purpose. The Shadowkeepers operated with minimal communication or coordination with local Imperial authorities, their focus entirely on recapturing the escaped prisoners regardless of broader strategic considerations. On the Forge World Medes II, a Shadowkeeper team led by Shield Captain Arcona tracked an escaped prisoner designated the Infinite Recursion, an entity that appeared to be a malfunctioning men of iron from the dark age of technology. The hunt led them through increasingly corrupted forge temples, where the entity had begun replicating itself through the world's manufacturing systems. The Shadowkeepers eventually contained the threat, but not before implementing an exterminatus-level purge of 3 major manufacturing districts, an action that brought them into direct conflict with local Mechanicus authorities. In the Orpheus sector, Warden Hydrax pursued an escaped warp entity that had possessed a succession of planetary governors, causing subtle corruption that nearly turned the entire sector against the Imperium. The Shadowkeeper operated alone, moving between worlds and eliminating possessed officials before finally tracing the entity to its final host. The operation concluded with the containment of the entity and the implementation of memory modification protocols to remove knowledge of the event from sector records. These external operations revealed the extraordinary autonomy granted to the Shadowkeepers in pursuit of their containment mandate. Operating without oversight from even the Captain General, individual shield captains made field decisions that sometimes impacted entire worlds. Their authority derived from ancient protocols established during the earliest days of the Imperium. This independence occasionally created tension with other Imperial organizations, particularly the Inquisition, which viewed the Shadowkeepers' unilateral actions as infringements upon their own authority regarding warp entities and technological heresy. The methods employed by the Shadowkeepers for recapturing escaped prisoners vary according to the nature of the entity involved. Physical threats might be engaged directly, with specialized weapons designed to incapacitate rather than destroy. Warp entities often require more complex approaches, combining Null Maiden technology from the Sisters of Silence with ancient containment, devices that create localized reality bubbles within which the entities can be isolated and transported. For particularly dangerous escapes, the Shadowkeepers maintain a cadre of specialists designated as Wardens Eternal. These custodians undergo additional training in containment protocols and often incorporate technologies normally forbidden within the Imperium. Warden Tylos, who successfully recaptured the chronoparasite that escaped during the 38th millennium, utilized a temporal displacement device that allowed him to operate outside normal time flow, matching the entity's ability to phase between moments in time. The psychological impact of serving as a Shadowkeeper manifests in various ways. Many develop a detached perspective on existence, their daily confrontation with reality-defying horrors, creating a philosophical outlook distinct from their brothers in other shield companies. Others adopt ritualistic behaviors designed to reinforce mental discipline, incorporating elements from protective traditions that predate the Imperium itself. A significant percentage request reassignment to frontline combat duties after their rotation ends, seeking the clarity of conventional warfare after years spent guarding against threats that defy comprehension. Shield Captain Hedrax, in a restricted memoir shared only among senior Shadowkeepers, described the psychological toll. "We stand at the threshold between knowledge and oblivion, between remembering what humanity has encountered and the mercy of forgetting. Each day we absorb what others must never know exists. Each hour we confront what the Imperium pretends cannot be. This is a burden beyond mere vigilance. It is to become the repository of humanity's darkest encounters, while ensuring those secrets remain contained. The training of new Shadowkeepers involves carefully controlled exposure to the less dangerous prisoners, gradually building psychological resistance to the influence such entities can exert. Prospective Shadowkeepers undergo simulated containment breaches, facing holographic projections and psychic imprints that prepare them for actual encounters. Those who show particular aptitude for resisting warp influence or technological corruption are selected for specialized roles guarding the most dangerous cells. The galaxy-spanning catastrophe known as the Gathering Storm marked a pivotal moment for the Adeptus Custodes. For 10 millennia, they had maintained their vigilant watch over the Emperor's physical form, rarely venturing beyond the confines of the Imperial Palace. This self-imposed isolation had become so entrenched in their identity that many Imperial citizens doubted the Custodes still existed at all, believing them to be merely ceremonial figures or propaganda fabrications meant to reassure the masses that the Emperor remained protected. The first signs that this era of seclusion would end came when reality itself began to fracture across the galaxy. As the 41st millennium drew to a close, warp storms of unprecedented scale erupted throughout Imperial space. On Terra, the astronomic flickered, and the psychic burden on the Emperor intensified visibly. The custodians standing guard within the Sanctum Imperialis reported disturbances in the Emperor's already fragile life signs, fluctuations that coincided with massive warp disturbances rippling across the galaxy. Shield Captain Valerian, assigned to the outer chambers of the Imperial Palace, noted an immediate shift in Custodian deployment patterns. Warriors who had spent centuries patrolling the same corridors were reassigned to reinforce positions near known weak points in Terra's psychic defenses. The Shadowkeepers entered a state of heightened alert, doubling the guards on the dark cells as their prisoners grew increasingly agitated in response to the changing warp conditions. The first direct threat to Terra came not as an invasion fleet, but as a series of demonic manifestations within the palace itself. In locations where the barrier between real space and the warp had grown thin, lesser demons materialized, testing the Custodians' defensive preparations. These incursions, while swiftly contained, represented a concerning escalation. Demons had not manifested directly within the palace since the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, and their sudden appearance suggested a weakening of the psychic wards that had protected the imperial heart for millennia. Captain General Trajan Valoris responded by implementing contingency protocols developed centuries earlier, but never before activated. The Custodian Guard reorganized into a more aggressive defensive posture, with rapid response teams positioned throughout the palace complex. The previously rare sight of Alaris Terminators became common in the outer chambers, their imposing bulk a visible statement of the Custodes' readiness to meet any threat with overwhelming force. As the demonic incursions increased in frequency and strength, the Custodes found themselves fighting alongside other Imperial defenders for the first time in millennia. Detachments of Sisters of Silence, long separated from their traditional alliance with the Custodes, were summoned to Terra to reinforce psychic defenses. Their null auras proved invaluable in disrupting the warp energies that allowed demons to manifest, creating zones where the Custodians could engage the entities on more favorable terms. The most significant breach occurred in the Outer Palace's Precinct of Voice, where a Herald of Tzeentch managed to establish a temporary warp portal. The resulting incursion threatened to overwhelm local defenses until Shield Captain Valerian led a counterattack with elements of the Dread Host. The battle raged for hours across the precinct's administrative chambers, with Custodians in Alaris Terminator armor teleporting directly into demon concentrations to disrupt their cohesion. The fighting destroyed priceless historical records and architectural features dating back to the Great Crusade, but the breach was contained before it could spread to more sensitive areas. These defensive actions, while successful, represented only the most visible aspect of the Custodes' response to the gathering storm. Behind the scenes, the eyes of the Emperor, those former Custodians who had left active service but continued to serve as intelligence gatherers, reported unprecedented activity across Terra. Cults dedicated to the ruinous powers emerged from hiding, some having infiltrated significant imperial institutions. The Custodes responded with targeted strikes, eliminating cult leadership before their activities could synchronize with the increasing warp disturbances. As the situation throughout the galaxy deteriorated, with Cadia falling to Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade and the Cicatrix Maledictum splitting the Imperium in two, the Custodes found their traditional isolationist stance increasingly untenable. The threat to the Emperor was no longer confined to direct assaults on the palace, but had expanded to include existential dangers to the Imperium itself. This realization prompted a fundamental reassessment of the Custodian Guard's role in Imperial defense. The catalyst for true change came with the unexpected arrival of the Inari on Luna, Terra's ancient satellite. Led by Archmagos Belisarius Call and the Eldar priestess Ivrain, this unusual delegation brought with them the armor and weapons of Robute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, who had lain in stasis since receiving a mortal wound from his brother Fulgrim nearly 10 millennia earlier. Their stated intention to revive the Primarch was met with skepticism and suspicion by Terran authorities. The Custodes, however, recognized the potential significance of this development. Shield Captain Valerian and a detachment of Custodian guards were dispatched to Luna to assess the situation, and if necessary, secure the Primarch's remains against desecration. What they found on the satellite defied their expectations, a genuine attempt to restore one of the Emperor's sons to life, using a combination of Call's technological expertise and Ivrain's mysterious powers as a servant of the newly awakened Eldar god of death. The revival process was already underway when the Custodians arrived, complicated by a sudden assault from the forces of chaos who sought to prevent Guilliman's return. Valerian made the momentous decision to defend the revival chamber, committing his warriors to holding back the chaos attackers while Call and Ivrain completed their work. This choice represented a significant departure from traditional Custodian doctrine, which would have prioritized securing the Primarch's remains over allowing Xenos to perform unknown rituals upon them. The battle for the revival chamber tested the Custodians' combat abilities against some of the most dedicated servants of the Dark Gods. Chaos Space Marines from the Black Legion and the Emperor's Children fought with fanatic determination to reach Guilliman's prone form, requiring the Custodians to employ their full tactical repertoire. Valerian himself engaged a Chaos champion in single combat near the chamber entrance, his Guardian spear cleaving through warp-enhanced armor to end the threat. When Guilliman finally awoke, the Custodians were among the first to witness his return. Their presence proved crucial in the confused moments that followed, as the revived Primarch struggled to comprehend how the Imperium had changed during his long absence. The Custodians, with their direct connection to the Emperor and their comprehensive knowledge of Imperial history, provided Guilliman with context that helped him navigate the initial shock of his awakening. The journey from Luna to Terra became a fighting retreat as Chaos forces throughout the Sol system converged to prevent the Primarch from reaching the Imperial Palace. The Custodian escort expanded as additional warriors joined from Terra, forming a golden honor guard around Guilliman. This visible alliance between the Custodes and the returned Primarch sent a powerful message throughout the Imperium. The Emperor's Praetorians had recognized Guilliman's authority in a way they had not acknowledged any Imperial leader since the heresy. Upon reaching Terra, Guilliman requested an audience with the Emperor himself. This unprecedented request placed the Custodes in a difficult position. No individual had been permitted into the Sanctum Imperialis for a private audience in thousands of years, but Guilliman was no ordinary supplicant. After consultation among the most senior shield captains and the Captain General himself, the Custodes granted the Primarch's request, escorting him through the inner sanctums of the palace to the Golden Throne. What transpired during Guilliman's audience with the Emperor remains known only to the Primarch himself and the Custodian guards who maintained their silent vigil during the meeting. When Guilliman emerged, however, he did so with renewed purpose and apparent clarity regarding his role in the Imperium's future. He claimed the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium, a position he had held during the heresy, and immediately began implementing sweeping reforms to address the dire threats facing humanity. The Custodes' reaction to Guilliman's reforms proved more complex than many Imperial observers anticipated. Rather than resisting the Primarch's assertion of authority, the Custodian Guard appeared to welcome the return of competent leadership to the Imperium. Captain General Valorous publicly acknowledged Guilliman's right to command Imperial forces and pledged Custodian support for his efforts to stabilize the Imperium's defenses against the threats unleashed by the gathering storm. This support manifested most visibly in Guilliman's declaration of the Indomitus Crusade, a massive Imperial counteroffensive designed to push back against Chaos advances and reinforce worlds cut off by the Cicatrix Maledictum. In a move that shocked many Imperial institutions, Captain General Valorous committed significant Custodian forces to this crusade, the first large-scale deployment of the Adeptus Custodes beyond the Sol system since the Great Crusade itself. The shield captains selected for this unprecedented deployment approached their new role with characteristic adaptability. Though they had trained for millennia in the confined spaces of the Imperial Palace, focusing on defensive operations and close protection, they quickly adjusted their tactics for offensive campaigns across multiple war zones. Custodian strike forces typically operated as independent units, serving as elite shock troops for particularly challenging objectives or as personal guards for Guilliman himself during critical operations. Shield Captain Achalar, commanding a contingent of 30 custodians during the liberation of the Hyperia system, demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of even small custodian forces in open warfare. When conventional Imperial forces became bogged down attempting to recapture the system's primary hive world, Achalar led a precision strike against the Chaos command structure. Deploying via teleportation directly into the enemy's central fortress, the Custodians eliminated the Chaos leadership within hours, throwing the defending forces into disarray and allowing the main Imperial assault to succeed with minimal casualties. This new operational freedom led to significant evolutions in Custodian doctrine. Warriors who had spent centuries perfecting defensive techniques now developed expertise in offensive operations across diverse environments. The Solar Watch, traditionally focused on security within the Sol system, expanded its operational parameters to include rapid response actions throughout nearby sectors. The Dread Host, previously deployed only against direct threats to Terra, became a roving strike force, bringing overwhelming force against priority targets identified by Guilliman's strategic command. Perhaps the most significant change came with the formation of the Emissaries Imperatus, a new shield company created specifically to represent the Emperor's authority in Guilliman's crusade. These warriors, selected for both their combat prowess and their diplomatic acumen, carried ancient standards and relics that had not left Terra since the heresy. Their presence on distant battlefields served both practical and symbolic purposes, reinforcing Imperial forces with transhuman warriors of unmatched ability, while demonstrating the direct connection between Guilliman's campaign and the Emperor's will. The deployment of Custodian forces beyond Terra necessitated adjustments to their traditional equipment and tactics. Warriors accustomed to operating within the controlled environment of the Imperial Palace now faced diverse battlefield conditions across thousands of worlds. Shield Captain Tybalus, commanding Custodian forces in the Ultima Segmentum, developed modified deployment protocols that emphasized mobility and self-sufficiency. His warriors utilized Dawn Eagle jetbikes and venerable land raiders to maintain operational tempo across vast distances, adapting their traditionally individualistic fighting style to coordinate effectively with Astartes and Astra Militarum forces. The Shadowkeepers, meanwhile, found their responsibilities expanded beyond the confines of the Dark Cells. As the formation of the Great Rift weakened reality across the galaxy, ancient threats long contained by the Custodes began to stir in vaults and prisons beyond Terra. Shield Captain Borsa Thursk dispatched small teams of Shadowkeepers to secure these forgotten holdings, preventing the escape of entities whose existence had been deliberately erased from Imperial records. These operations often brought the Shadowkeepers into conflict with other Imperial organizations, particularly the Inquisition, which resented the Custodes' unilateral actions regarding such sensitive matters. For individual Custodians, the expansion of their duties beyond Terra represented both challenge and opportunity. Warriors who had spent centuries confined to the same chambers and corridors now found themselves fighting across diverse environments against enemies they had previously known only through historical records. This exposure to the broader Imperium provided fresh perspective on the state of the Emperor's realm, confronting the Custodes with the reality of how far humanity had fallen from the ideals of the Great Crusade era. The deployment of Custodian forces beyond the Sol system marked a seismic shift in their 10 millennia-old operational doctrine. No longer confined to the walls of the Imperial Palace, the Golden Warriors found themselves fighting across a fractured galaxy as part of Guilliman's grand strategy to reclaim worlds lost to the darkness. This unprecedented mobilization required new organizational structures, and thus the concept of shield hosts was formalized and expanded beyond its traditional confines. Shield hosts represented task-oriented battle groups composed of elements from multiple shield companies, assembled for specific strategic objectives rather than permanent formations. Each shield host incorporated warriors with complementary specializations, creating balanced forces capable of independent operation far from Terra. The Adeptus Custodes had always maintained flexible internal organization, but the scale of the Indomitus Crusade demanded more formal structures to coordinate effectively with other Imperial forces across multiple war zones. The Solar Vigilants, first of the major shield hosts deployed to the Indomitus Crusade, formed around a core of veterans from the Solar Watch. These warriors, accustomed to void warfare and rapid response operations throughout the Sol system, adapted their tactics for the broader strategic requirements of Guilliman's campaign. Shield Captain Tylos Amadon led this formation of 200 Custodians, incorporating elements from the Theranati and multiple jetbike squadrons from the Virtus Praetors. Their first major engagement came at the Denothrian Gap, a strategic passage through a dense asteroid field that controlled access to 17 embattled systems in the Segmentum Solar's outer reaches. Chaos forces had established heavily fortified positions throughout the asteroids, creating a gauntlet that had repelled 3 previous Imperial liberation fleets. The Solar Vigilants approached this challenge with characteristic precision, deploying small strike teams simultaneously against 37 critical targets, identified through careful analysis of the enemy's defensive network. Virtus Praetors on Dawn Eagle jetbikes performed high-speed surgical strikes against sensor arrays and communication hubs, moving through the void between asteroids with a grace that belied their massive armored forms. Meanwhile, Alaris Terminators teleported directly into command bunkers, their Oromite plate shrugging off desperate defensive fire as they systematically eliminated the Chaos leadership. The entire operation lasted less than 6 hours, but completely collapsed the enemy's defensive coordination, allowing the main Imperial fleet to push through with minimal losses. The shield host's success at the Denothrian Gap established a template for Custodian operations throughout the Crusade. Rather than functioning as conventional frontline troops, Custodian shield hosts specialized in decapitation strikes and strategic interventions at critical junctures. Their deployment was measured not in numbers of warriors committed, but in the strategic value of their objectives. A squad of 5 Custodians could shift the balance of an entire campaign by eliminating a key enemy asset or securing a vital location at precisely the right moment. The Gilded Talon, second of the major shield hosts, specialized in void warfare and ship-to-ship boarding actions. Commanded by Shield Captain Heraclast Vadrian, whose expertise in void combat dated back to suppression actions against pirate fleets in the Sol system, this formation incorporated a higher proportion of Aquilan Terminators equipped for the unique challenges of starship combat. Their golden armor modified with additional mag locks and specialized breaching equipment, these warriors became the nightmare of Chaos fleet commanders throughout the Crusade's path. During the Battle of the Nexus arrangement, the Gilded Talon demonstrated the devastating impact of Custodian boarding actions. When a massive Chaos armada threatened to overwhelm Imperial forces in the Orpheus sector, Shield Captain Vadrian identified the enemy flagship, a corrupted Gloriana-class battleship named Eternal Suffering, as the linchpin of their formation. Rather than engaging in a conventional fleet battle against superior numbers, he committed his entire shield host to a single, overwhelming assault on this target. Using a captured Chaos escort vessel as a Trojan horse, the Custodians approached within optimal teleport range before launching their attack. 60 Aquilan Terminators materialized simultaneously throughout the massive vessel's command sections, while breaching craft delivered additional forces to the engineering decks. The Golden Warriors moved through the ship's corrupted corridors with methodical precision, ignoring lesser threats to focus on critical systems and command personnel. The ship's Chaos Lord, a former Luna Wolf named Sartok the Everlasting, marshaled his elite guard to repel the boarders, leading to a brutal confrontation on the vessel's flag bridge. Shield Captain Vadrian personally engaged this ancient traitor, his guardian spear moving with such speed that observers reported seeing only golden blurs as the two combatants clashed. Though Sartok had survived for 10 millennia through pacts with dark powers, his corrupted flesh proved no match for Vadrian's peerless skill. With the Chaos Lord's death, resistance throughout the vessel collapsed, allowing the Custodians to complete their mission by overloading the ship's warp engines. The destruction of the eternal suffering created a catastrophic psychic shockwave that disrupted the cohesion of the entire Chaos fleet. Vessels that had been fighting with coordinated precision fell into disarray, many retreating into the warp rather than facing the suddenly resurgent Imperial forces. A single shield host had effectively neutralized an enemy armada that outnumbered the Imperial defenders 3-1, demonstrating the strategic impact of precisely applied Custodian might. The shield host known as the Emperor's Avenging Sons took a different approach to Crusade operations, focusing on direct support for Guilliman himself during particularly challenging engagements. Commanded by Shield Captain Rothrian de Graves, a veteran of the Dread Host, this formation served as both honor guard and strategic reserve, deploying wherever the Primarch faced the most determined resistance. Their golden armor, adorned with additional Imperial eagles and Crusade markings, made them instantly recognizable on any battlefield, a visible symbol of the direct connection between Guilliman's authority and the Emperor's will. During the liberation of Connor, the Emperor's Avenging Sons proved decisive in the campaign's final stages. When Guilliman led the assault against the Death Guard's primary stronghold, the shield host formed the spearhead of his attack. Custodians in Alaris Terminator armor teleported directly into the heart of the enemy fortress, creating a golden corridor through which the Primarch and his Victrix Guard could advance. The Death Guard, even with their supernatural resilience, found themselves outmatched by warriors whose every movement demonstrated 10 millennia of martial perfection. The tactical coordination between Custodian shield hosts and Guilliman's Primaris Space Marine forces developed rapidly throughout the Crusade. Initially, there had been tensions. The Custodes were accustomed to operating independently, making tactical decisions based on their own assessment rather than following external command structures. The Primaris Marines, though created with improved gene seed and equipment, still adhered to traditional Astartes' chain of command principles. These different approaches initially created friction during joint operations. Shield Captain Achalar addressed this challenge by developing specialized integration protocols for Custodian Astartes operations. Rather than attempting to slot Custodian forces into conventional command structures, he established a system of strategic objectives that allowed both forces to operate according to their strengths while maintaining overall coordination. Custodians would identify and pursue high-value targets independently, while Primaris forces secured broader objectives and maintained battlefield control. This approach proved particularly effective during the Hephaestion campaign, where Custodians from the Solar Vigilance operated alongside Primaris Marines from the Grey Shields to liberate a vital Forge world from Dark Mechanicum control. While the Primaris forces engaged the bulk of the enemy's corrupted Skitarii legions in conventional warfare, Custodian strike teams targeted the Dark Magos, directing the defense. The simultaneous pressure on multiple fronts prevented the enemy from concentrating their forces effectively, leading to a decisive Imperial victory with minimal casualties. The most remarkable aspect of Custodian participation in the Indomitus Crusade was their adaptation to wide-scale warfare after millennia of focusing primarily on defense and covert operations. Warriors who had spent centuries perfecting close protection techniques and palace defense strategies now found themselves fighting across open battlefields against diverse enemies. This transition might have challenged lesser troops, but the Custodes demonstrated the comprehensive nature of their training and the adaptability inherent in their creation. Shield Captain Tibellus exemplified this adaptability during the Parmenio Compliance, where his strike force encountered previously unknown Xenos entities that employed phase-shifting technology to bypass conventional defenses. Rather than withdrawing to reassess, Tibellus immediately modified his warriors' tactics, adjusting the frequency of their power weapons to match the phase variants of the Xenos. This battlefield innovation, implemented without prior experience against such enemies, demonstrated the cognitive advantages the Emperor had built into his companions. The Custodes' involvement in the Crusade extended beyond direct combat operations. As the Emperor's representatives, they sometimes served diplomatic functions, particularly when dealing with human worlds that had been cut off from the Imperium by warp storms or Xenos activity. On Helios Quintus, Shield Captain Arcona negotiated the reintegration of a human society that had developed in isolation for 3,000 years. His status as one of the Emperor's personal guardians, carrying weight that even Guilliman's authority might not have matched among the planet's Emperor-revering population. This diplomatic role occasionally created tension with other Imperial organizations, particularly the Ecclesiarchy, which viewed itself as the authorized interpreter of the Emperor's will. When Shield Captain Hedrax directly contradicted a cardinal's pronouncements regarding Imperial compliance requirements on the Shrine World Ophelia 7, the resulting conflict required Guilliman's personal intervention to resolve. The incident highlighted the complex interplay between different sources of authority in the post-gathering Storm Imperium, with the Custodes representing a direct but long-absent connection to the Emperor's original vision. Perhaps the most significant contribution of the Shield hosts came not during major campaigns, but in their response to the Hexarchy's attempted coup on Terra itself. While Guilliman led the crusade across the stars, a faction within the High Lords, the so-called Hexarchy, plotted to seize control of the Imperium's government, viewing the Primarch's reforms as a threat to their traditional authority. Their conspiracy extended deep into multiple Imperial organizations, including elements of the Adeptus Arbites and the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. The Shield captains remaining on Terra, led by Captain General Valorous himself, uncovered this plot through their network of eyes and other surveillance assets. Rather than immediately moving against the conspirators, Valorous allowed the plot to develop until all participants had revealed themselves. This patient approach reflected the Custodes' long experience with Terran political intrigue and their understanding that premature action might allow some conspirators to escape detection. When the Hexarchy finally moved to implement their coup, seizing control of key administrative centers and deploying specialized forces to neutralize potential opposition, the Custodes responded with overwhelming force. Alaris Terminators teleported directly into the Hexarch's secure meeting chamber in the midst of their victory celebration, while other Custodian forces moved simultaneously against their military assets throughout the Palace district. The Golden Warriors struck with such precision and coordination that most of the coup forces were eliminated before they realized they were under attack. The most dramatic confrontation came when Valorous personally led a strike against the Draken Vangorich, Grand Master of Assassins, who had provided the coup's operational backbone. The Captain General teleported directly into Vangorich's supposedly impregnable sanctuary within the Assassinorum temples, bypassing layered defenses that would have stopped any other Imperial force. The subsequent battle between the Custodian leader and the Master Assassin's personal guard became the stuff of Terra's underground legends, with Valorous reportedly defeating 5 Eversor assassins simultaneously before capturing Vangorich alive for subsequent interrogation. The Custodes' intervention proved decisive in preserving Guilliman's reforms and preventing a potentially catastrophic civil conflict within the Imperium's heart. More significantly, it demonstrated that the Adeptus Custodes had evolved beyond their traditional role as passive guardians of the Emperor's physical form. They had become active protectors of his broader legacy, willing to intervene directly when the Imperium's stability was threatened from within. As the Indomitus Crusade progressed across the galaxy, the Shield hosts continued to refine their operational doctrines based on accumulated battlefield experience. The Solar Vigilants developed specialized tactics for combating demon engines after encountering such abominations in the Cheridan sector, incorporating insights from ancient records of the Heresy-era conflicts. The Gilded Talon perfected void warfare techniques that accounted for the reality warping effects common near the borders of the Great Rift, where conventional physics became increasingly unreliable. This continuous adaptation reflected the Custodes' fundamental nature as learners and perfecters. Unlike Space Marines, who often relied on doctrinal traditions passed down through their chapters, Custodians approached each engagement as a unique problem to be solved through the application of their transhuman intellects. This cognitive flexibility, combined with their peerless combat abilities, made even small custodian forces disproportionately effective against enemies who relied on predictable Imperial responses. The relationship between the Adeptus Custodes and the Sisters of Silence represents one of the most formidable military partnerships in Imperial history, dating back to the earliest days of the Emperor's unification of Terra. While the Golden Warriors stood as the Emperor's companions and guardians, the Silent Sisterhood served as his hunters, their null abilities perfectly complementing the martial prowess of the Custodians. Together, they formed the original Talons of the Emperor, a designation that acknowledged their status as the master of mankind's most precisely directed weapons. During the Great Crusade, this partnership operated with deadly efficiency against psychic threats that conventional Imperial forces struggled to counter. The Sisters' null aura, the soulless void that disrupts warp energies in their vicinity, created zones where psychic powers faltered and warp entities found their very existence painful. The Custodes, with their peerless combat abilities, could then engage these weakened foes on purely physical terms, eliminating the uncertainty that accompanies battles against warp-empowered adversaries. This tactical synergy proved particularly effective during the infamous Arc Reach Cluster campaign, where combined Talons forces confronted rogue human psychers who had established a separatist enclave protected by warp-based defenses. Oblivion Knights of the Silent Sisterhood penetrated the psychic barriers that had repelled conventional assaults, creating breach points through which Custodian strike teams entered the enemy stronghold. The defenders, suddenly finding their psychic advantages neutralized, fell quickly to the precise violence of the Emperor's Golden Guardians. The organizational structure of the original Talons emphasized this complementary relationship. Rather than maintaining entirely separate command hierarchies, Custodian Shield Captains and Silent Sister Oblivion Knights developed integrated operational protocols that maximized their combined effectiveness. Training exercises conducted aboard the Somnus Citadel, the massive void station that served as the Sisters' primary base, regularly included both forces working in concert against simulated threats designed to test their coordination. This close partnership extended to specialized equipment adaptations. Certain Custodian wore gear-incorporated modifications specifically designed to enhance effectiveness when operating alongside Sisters of Silence. The Presidium Shield, for instance, contained field generators calibrated to work in harmony with the null field projected by Silent Sisters, creating overlapping zones of protection against both physical and psychic attacks. Similarly, some Sisters carried specially modified sonic weapons whose effects were enhanced when deployed within the aura field generated by their Custodian counterparts. The most elite formation within the combined Talons was the Excruciatus Cadre, comprising veteran Custodians and high-ranking Sisters who specialized in operations against the most dangerous psychic threats. These warriors underwent additional joint training focusing on tactics specific to combating warp entities and rogue psychers. Their effectiveness during the latter stages of the Great Crusade earned them a fearsome reputation, with several compliant worlds surrendering immediately upon learning that the Excruciatus had entered their system. The traumatic events of the Horus Heresy fractured this ancient partnership. As the Custodes withdrew to Terra following the disaster of the Webway project, the Sisters of Silence found themselves increasingly deployed independently across the fragmenting Imperium. By the time Horus reached Terra, the Talons no longer operated as a unified force, but as separate organizations pursuing related but distinct objectives. During the subsequent millennia, the decline of the Silent Sisterhood mirrored the Custodes' retreat into isolation, though for different reasons. Where the Custodians withdrew by choice, focusing their attention on the direct protection of the Emperor's physical form, the Sisters suffered from institutional neglect and diminishing resources. Their recruitment became increasingly difficult as the Imperium's bureaucracy grew more labyrinthine, and their null maiden facilities received less support with each passing century. By the 41st millennium, the Sisters of Silence had been reduced to a shadow of their former strength. Their primary fortress, the Somnus Citadel, had been abandoned centuries earlier, forcing the remaining Sisters to operate from a scattered network of smaller bases. Their numbers had dwindled to the point where some Imperial historians questioned whether they still existed at all, their activities so covert, and their presence so rare that they passed into legend for most of the Imperium citizens. The catastrophic events of the Gathering Storm changed everything. As the galaxy fractured and warp storms of unprecedented scale erupted across Imperial space, both the Custodes and the Sisters of Silence found their traditional roles insufficient to meet the new threats. The psychic awakening that accompanied these events created an environment where trained Null Maidens became more valuable than at any point since the heresy, while the direct threat to Terra forced the Custodes to reconsider their self-imposed isolation. The return of Roboute Guilliman provided the catalyst for the formal reformation of the Talons of the Emperor. The Primarch, with his comprehensive understanding of Imperial history and his intimate knowledge of the Emperor's original designs, recognized immediately the strategic value of reuniting these complementary forces. Within days of assuming the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium, Guilliman issued the Concilium Imperialis Martial, a directive that officially re-established the Talons as a unified imperial institution. Shield Captain Valerian, who had fought alongside Sisters of Silence during the defense of the Imperial Palace against demonic incursions, became one of the strongest advocates for this reunification. His experiences had demonstrated the tactical advantages of combined operations, particularly against the warp-empowered threats that increasingly plagued the Imperium. Working with Knight Commander Jenna Sharbin of the Silent Sisterhood, Valerian developed updated protocols for joint deployments that accounted for the evolution both organizations had undergone during their millennia of separation. The first major test of the reformed Talons came during the Battle of Lion's Gate, when Magnus the Red led a massive assault against the Imperial Palace itself. The Thousand Sons Primarch, now ascended to demonhood, brought with him sorcerers whose psychic might could tear reality itself asunder. Conventional defenses proved inadequate against such power, with void shields collapsing under psychic pressure and automated weapons turning against their operators under the influence of Tzeentchian magic. The deployment of combined Talons forces proved decisive in countering this threat. Silent Sisters positioned themselves at strategic junctures throughout the defensive perimeter, their null auras creating dead zones where the Thousand Sons sorcery faltered. Custodian counter-attack forces exploited these vulnerabilities, launching precision strikes against enemy concentrations that had suddenly found their greatest advantage neutralized. The Golden Warriors moved through the null fields with practiced ease, their weapons finding marks among enemies disoriented by the sudden loss of their psychic abilities. Magnus himself encountered this deadly synergy when he confronted a combined force led by Shield Captain Valerian and Oblivion Knight Tano Alaya. The Demon Primarch's psychic might, capable of leveling entire fortifications with a gesture, diminished noticeably as he entered the overlapping null field generated by Alaya's cadre. This momentary vulnerability allowed Valerian's Custodians to engage the Primarch directly, their guardian spears inflicting wounds that would have been impossible against his fully empowered form. Though Magnus eventually withdrew rather than risk destruction, the encounter demonstrated the strategic potential of the reformed Talons against even the most formidable warp-empowered adversaries. Following this successful defense, Guilliman incorporated Talon's detachments into his Indomitus crusade, recognizing their unique value against the psychic threats that proliferated in the wake of the Cicatrix Maledictum's formation. These deployments followed a consistent pattern. Small groups of sisters would accompany larger custodian contingents, their null abilities creating tactical opportunities that the Golden Warriors could exploit with devastating efficiency. The Battle of Colossi exemplified this approach. When a Thousand Sons warband established a foothold on this forge world, using sorcery to corrupt its manufacturing capabilities, conventional Imperial forces found themselves outmatched by the combination of psychic power and technological superiority. A Talon strike force comprising 30 Custodians and 12 Sisters of Silence deployed directly into the heart of enemy territory, using the Sisters' null aura to create a zone where teleportation could safely bypass the sorceress wards protecting the Thousand Sons' position. Once inside the enemy perimeter, the Talons executed a carefully choreographed assault. The Silent Sisters divided into 3 teams, each creating a null corridor through the enemy's defensive positions. Custodian strike teams advanced through these corridors, their guardian spears claiming dozens of Thousand Sons warriors who suddenly found themselves without the psychic advantages that had made them so formidable. The precision of this attack allowed the Talons to reach and eliminate the Warband's leadership within hours, collapsing their entire operation before reinforcements could arrive. The tactical flexibility of the reformed Talons extended beyond direct combat operations. Against the demon-worshipping cult that had infiltrated the governance structure of Hive Teduanis, the Sisters of Silence operated as advanced scouts, their null nature making them invisible to the psychic sentries the cultists had placed throughout the Hive. This infiltration allowed them to identify key targets and disable crucial defensive systems before the Custodian assault force arrived. When the Golden Warriors teleported directly into the cult's inner sanctum, they found their enemies already disoriented and vulnerable, their demonic allies banished by the Sisters' presence. The equipment and war gear of the Talons evolved to enhance this synergistic relationship. Custodian Vexilla standards incorporated null field generators that extended the effect of nearby Sisters, creating larger zones where psychic powers failed. The Sisters, meanwhile, adapted their traditional execution blades with power field technology based on Custodian designs, increasing their effectiveness against the transhuman physiology of Chaos Space Marines. These technological exchanges represented more than practical improvements. They symbolized the renewed bond between organizations that had operated independently for too long. Training protocols for the reformed Talons emphasized coordinated action against specific threat types. The Excruciatus Protocol, revived from ancient records of the Great Crusade, focused on neutralizing psychic leadership elements that typically directed enemy forces. Silent Sisters would penetrate enemy formations using their natural invisibility to psychic senses, reaching positions from which they could suddenly activate null maiden devices that expanded their aura effect exponentially. The momentary psychic blindness this created among enemy psychers provided the perfect opportunity for Custodian Virtus Praetors to strike from above, eliminating command elements before they could recover. Against the Thousand Sons, who represented perhaps the most sophisticated practitioners of warp sorcery among the traitor legions, the Talons developed specialized counter-tactics. The Rubric Marines that formed the bulk of Thousand Sons forces presented a unique challenge: animated suits of armor, bound to the fragments of their former occupants' souls. The Sisters discovered that concentrated null fields could temporarily disrupt this binding, causing momentary immobility that Custodian warriors could exploit. This tactic proved particularly effective during the Gehenna campaign, where a small Talons force eliminated a Thousand Sons warband, 3 times their number, by systematically targeting their sorceress commanders while disrupting their automaton soldiers. The most elite formation within the reformed Talons, designated the Witchseeker cohort, specialized in operations against the most dangerous psychic threats. Combining veteran Silent Sisters with custodians from the Shadowkeeper's Shield Company, this formation brought together expertise in containing both physical and immaterial dangers. Their missions often involved capturing, rather than killing, enemy psychers, securing these threats for transportation to specialized containment facilities on Terra. During the Psychona Purge, the Witchseeker cohort captured 3 renegade alpha-level psychers, whose abilities had allowed them to dominate an entire subsector, delivering them to the Black Ships for eventual internment in the Imperial Palace's specialized holding cells. The organizational structure of the reformed Talons balanced the need for unified command with respect for the distinct traditions of both constituent organizations. Joint operations typically followed a mission-specific command structure, with leadership determined by the primary objective rather than rigid hierarchy. Against predominantly psychic threats, Silent Sister Oblivion Knights might direct overall strategy, with custodians executing the tactical elements of the plan. For operations focused on high-value target elimination or asset recovery, custodian shield captains would command, with sisters providing specialized support. This flexible approach allowed the Talons to adapt their structure to diverse mission requirements while maintaining the distinct identities of both forces. The Sisters retained their internal hierarchy based around the Oblivion Knights and the various specialized orders like the Vigilators and Prosecutors. The Custodes continued to operate through their shield companies and specialized formations. What changed was the interface between these structures, with new protocols establishing clear lines of communication and authority for joint deployments. The impact of the reformed Talons extended beyond their direct military contributions. Their very existence represented a return to the Emperor's original design, a restoration of an institutional partnership that predated the Imperium itself. For many Imperial citizens, the sight of golden custodians fighting alongside black-clad silent sisters evoked ancient imagery from the Great Crusade era, a visible connection to a time when the Emperor still walked among his people. This symbolic value complemented their tactical effectiveness, creating a psychological impact that sometimes proved as valuable as their direct combat contributions. The birth of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the great rift that split the galaxy in twain, marked perhaps the most significant transformation in the Adeptus Custodes since the Emperor's internment upon the Golden Throne. The psychic shockwave that accompanied this cataclysmic event reverberated through the Imperial Palace itself, causing disturbances in the ancient wards that had protected the Emperor's sanctuary for 10 millennia. Within the Sanctum Imperialis, the companions reported fluctuations in the Emperor's life signs, momentary surges of energy that suggested even the master of mankind had been affected by this galaxy-reshaping phenomenon. Captain General Trajan Valorous responded with immediate and decisive action. The Custodian deployment throughout the palace shifted from their traditional defensive positions to a more dynamic posture, with rapid response teams positioned near known weak points in Terra's psychic defenses. The Shadowkeepers entered high alert as their ancient prisoners grew restless, straining against containment fields suddenly weakened by the galaxy-wide disruption of reality's fabric. The veil thins not just at the edges of the Imperium, but at its very heart, Valorous observed in his emergency address to the shield captains. Our vigilance must expand beyond these walls if we are to fulfill our purpose. This recognition, that the Emperor now faced threats that could not be countered solely through the direct defense of his physical form, catalyzed the most significant operational shift in Custodian history since the Horus Heresy. Shield hosts that had rarely ventured beyond the Sol system now deployed to distant war zones, targeting specific threats identified as potential existential dangers to Terra and the Emperor. The psychic awakening that accompanied the Great Rift's birth presented a unique challenge for the Custodes. Across the Imperium, latent psychers manifested in unprecedented numbers, their sudden emergence often accompanied by devastating warp phenomena. On thousands of worlds, Imperial citizens with dormant psychic potential found themselves abruptly overwhelmed by powers they could neither understand nor control. Some became unwitting conduits for demonic entities, while others formed the nuclei of apocalyptic warp storms that consumed entire cities. Shield Captain Arcona, commanding elements of the Dreadhost deployed to the Nephilim sector, encountered the aftermath of such an awakening on the hive world Tartarus Prime. The planet's upper spires had been transformed into a twisted landscape of impossible architecture, reality itself reshaped by the uncontrolled powers of a juvenile psyker whose abilities had manifested during a diplomatic gathering of the planet's noble houses. By the time the Custodians arrived, the phenomenon had consumed 3 hive spires and showed signs of accelerating expansion. Rather than employing conventional military assets against what was fundamentally a psychic threat, Arcona coordinated with a detachment of Sisters of Silence who had been operating independently in a neighboring system. The combined Talon's force penetrated to the heart of the distortion, the Sisters' null aura creating a path of stable reality through which the Custodians could advance. At the center, they found not a malevolent entity but a terrified child, her untrained mind accidentally reshaping the world around her. The operation concluded not with execution, as might have been expected from other Imperial forces, but with containment and extraction. The girl was secured by the Sisters of Silence for transportation to Terra, her abilities deemed too significant to waste despite the destruction they had caused. This pragmatic approach, recognizing the potential value in properly controlled psychic power, reflected the Custodes' direct connection to the Emperor's original vision, unfiltered by the dogma that had accumulated over millennia of imperial history. Similar interventions occurred across the Imperium as the Custodes targeted the most dangerous manifestations of the psychic awakening. On Helios Quintus, Shield Captain Tibellus led a strike against a conclave of newly emerged psychers who had formed a self-protective collective against imperial persecution. Rather than the expected resistance, Tibellus found these psychers desperately trying to control their burgeoning abilities, seeking understanding rather than power. After assessing that they posed no immediate threat to the Emperor, he arranged for their transportation to Terra for proper evaluation, rather than summarily executing them as potential dangers. This nuanced approach to psychic threats distinguished Custodian operations from those of other imperial organizations. Where the Inquisition might reflexively purge any unauthorized psychic activity, the Custodes assessed each situation based on its specific characteristics and potential implications for the Emperor's security. This discernment stemmed from their direct knowledge of the Emperor's own views on human psychic potential, views established during the Great Crusade but often forgotten or deliberately obscured in the subsequent millennia of imperial dogma. Beyond these targeted interventions against psychic threats, the Custodes found themselves confronting more conventional dangers that nonetheless posed existential risks to the Imperium. The fragmentation of imperial space by the Great Rift had created opportunities for enemies both ancient and new to strike at vulnerable worlds. Traitor legions emerged from the Eye of Terror in unprecedented numbers, while Xeno's empires expanded into regions cut off from imperial defense. The shield host designated as the Emperor's Spears focused specifically on countering traitor legion activities that showed strategic coordination rather than opportunistic raiding. When intelligence from the eyes of the Emperor identified a pattern of World Eaters' attacks against shrine worlds housing relics from the Great Crusade era, Shield Captain Hydrax recognized a deliberate attempt to erase physical connections to the Emperor's original works. His shield host deployed to Ophelia 7 just as Cornate forces made planetfall, intercepting the traitor Astartes before they could reach the planet's primary reliquary. The subsequent battle demonstrated the continued martial superiority of the Custodes over even the most formidable Chaos Space Marines. Hydrax's warriors, though outnumbered nearly 10-1, systematically dismantled the World Eater's assault force through superior tactics and individual combat prowess. The Golden Warriors moved through the blood-maddened berserkers with cold efficiency, their guardian spears claiming lives with each precise thrust, while avoiding the wild, rage-fueled counterattacks of their corrupted opponents. Perhaps most significant was the capture of the World Eater's commander, a champion of Khorne known as Gorfind the Eternal. Under Shadowkeeper interrogation protocols, this ancient traitor revealed that the coordinated attacks on shrine worlds formed part of a larger strategy directed by agents of Abaddon the Despoiler. The intelligence gained from this capture allowed the Custodes to identify and neutralize similar operations across 3 sectors, preserving irreplaceable links to the Imperium's founding era. The expanded operational scope of the Custodes inevitably raised questions within their ranks about the proper interpretation of their duty to the Emperor. For 10 millennia, that duty had been defined primarily as the direct protection of his physical form. Now, with shield hosts deployed across the galaxy, some Custodians questioned whether they had strayed from their original purpose. This philosophical debate manifested most visibly in the discourse between 2 prominent shield captains, Valerian, who advocated for the broader interpretation of their protective mandate, and Navardaran, who argued for a return to their traditional focus on the Imperial Palace. "Our duty extends to the protection of the Emperor's work as well as his person," Valerian maintained during a conclave of shield captains. "What value is there in guarding his body if we allow his Imperium to collapse around us? The threats we face now cannot be countered solely from within these walls." Navardaren's counter-argument emphasized the potential risks of divided attention. Every custodian deployed beyond Terra represents a reduction in the Emperor's immediate defense. We were created as his companions and guardians, not as generals in distant campaigns. In expanding our scope, we risk failing in our primary duty should a direct threat emerge. This debate reflected not merely tactical disagreement, but fundamental questions about custodian identity in the post-Rift era. Were they primarily the Emperor's bodyguards, or the protectors of his broader vision? Could they effectively serve both purposes with their limited numbers, or did expansion necessarily mean dilution of their core responsibility? Captain General Valorous ultimately resolved this philosophical tension with characteristic pragmatism. The nature of the threat determines the nature of our response, he declared. We guard the Emperor not merely as a physical being, but as the master of mankind's destiny. When that destiny is threatened, whether by direct assault on the palace or by strategic attacks against his broader Imperium, we respond with appropriate force. This balanced approach allowed for continued custodian deployment beyond Terra, while maintaining their traditional vigilance within the palace itself. The shield host, designated as the Shadowkeepers, remained primarily focused on the dark cells and their dangerous prisoners, while the companions continued their eternal vigil within the Sanctum Imperialis. Other shield hosts rotated between external operations and palace security, ensuring that neither responsibility was neglected. The return of Robute Guilliman added another dimension to this evolving custodian identity. The relationship between the Adeptus Custodes and the resurrected Primarch proved complex, characterized by both cooperation and underlying tension. The Custodes recognized Guilliman's legitimacy as the Emperor's son and acknowledged the strategic necessity of his leadership during the Imperium's darkest hour. Yet they maintained a certain reserve, their ultimate loyalty remaining with the Emperor rather than any of his creations, even one as exalted as a Primarch. Shield Captain Valerian, who had witnessed Guilliman's revival on Luna and fought alongside him during the Terran Crusade, described this nuanced relationship. The Primarch commands our respect and our cooperation, but not our obedience. We fight alongside him because his goals align with the Emperor's preservation, but we remain vigilant to the possibility that his vision might someday diverge from his father's intent. This cautious approach stemmed from the Custodes' institutional memory of the Horus Heresy, when half the Primarchs had turned against their creator. While none suggested Guilliman harbored similar corruption, the historical precedent created an ingrained wariness that even the most loyal of the Emperor's sons could not entirely dispel. This wariness manifested in subtle ways, custodian representatives attending strategic planning sessions, not merely as participants, but as observers, ensuring that the Primarch's decisions remained aligned with what they perceived as the Emperor's will. Guilliman, for his part, demonstrated remarkable understanding of this dynamic. Rather than demanding the unquestioning loyalty that other imperial organizations offered, he engaged with the Custodes as partners in the Imperium's preservation, acknowledging their unique relationship with his father. During the formation of the Primaris Space Marines, he specifically consulted with Captain General Valorous regarding the genetic modifications involved, recognizing the Custodes' unparalleled expertise in transhuman creation. This consultation led to direct custodian involvement in the Primaris project, with Shield Captain Achalar assigned to observe the implementation of the new gene seed technologies. His reports back to Terra confirmed the stability of Call's work, while suggesting minor modifications to further reduce the risk of genetic degradation over time. This collaboration represented perhaps the most significant cooperation between the Custodes and a Primarch since the Great Crusade era, a partnership based on shared purpose rather than hierarchical authority. The areas of most productive cooperation between Guilliman and the Custodes typically involved direct threats to Terra or the Emperor. When intelligence suggested a potential Black Legion strike against the Sol system, the Primarch and Captain General Valorous developed a joint defense strategy that incorporated both custodian expertise in void warfare and Guilliman's unmatched strategic acumen. The resulting defensive posture proved so formidable that the anticipated attack never materialized, with chaos forces redirecting toward softer targets in neighboring sectors. Tensions emerged more frequently regarding broader imperial governance and the allocation of resources. The Custodes maintained their traditional skepticism toward bureaucratic structures, viewing the Imperium's administrative apparatus as a necessary but inherently flawed system. Guilliman's efforts to reform this apparatus sometimes encountered resistance from Custodian representatives who prioritized security considerations over administrative efficiency. These disagreements rarely erupted into open conflict, but created an underlying friction that occasionally complicated joint operations. Perhaps the most significant point of contention involved the interpretation of the Emperor's will. Guilliman, having spoken directly with his father after his resurrection, carried the weight of that recent communion. The Custodes, having stood guard over the Emperor for 10 millennia, believed they possessed a deeper understanding of his true intentions. When these interpretations diverged, as they did regarding the reorganization of the Inquisition's authority or the reformation of the imperial cult, the resulting philosophical debates could delay crucial decisions at the highest levels of imperial governance. Despite these tensions, the practical alliance between Guilliman and the Custodes proved remarkably effective in addressing the existential threats facing the Imperium. The shield host designated as the Emperor's spears frequently operated in direct support of Guilliman's campaigns, their golden warriors serving as both bodyguards and strategic assets during the most challenging engagements. When the Primarch confronted Mortarion on the plague-racked world of Parmenio, Custodian Virtus Praetors provided crucial aerial support that prevented the Death Guard from encircling the Imperial command position. As the era Indomitus progressed, the Adeptus Custodes found themselves in a position both familiar and unprecedented, standing as the Emperor's representatives in a galaxy more dangerous than any they had faced since the Horus Heresy, yet more engaged with the broader Imperium than they had been for 10 millennia. This evolution did not represent an abandonment of their original purpose, but rather an expansion of how that purpose was interpreted in the face of new threats. The Golden Warriors, who had once stood as silent sentinels within the Imperial Palace, now fought across 1,000 battlefields, their Ormite armor gleaming on war-torn worlds throughout the Imperium. Yet even as they expanded their operational scope, they remained fundamentally what the Emperor had created them to be: his companions, his guardians, the living embodiments of his will in a galaxy where his physical voice had fallen silent. In the darkness of the era Indomitus, the light of the Golden Legion burned brighter than it had for 10,000 years, a beacon of the Emperor's enduring power in an age of unprecedented peril.